No problem at all. So this is just a quick check to see whether the sound is working now. We've got a few technical issues. Darren, is that working any better? Thank you very much. We probably need to go back to the chair to start the meeting again. If that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Take two. Welcome to this Quarter 4 Police and Crime Panel meeting, Dorset Police and Crime Panel meeting. It is an informal meeting, which Mark Eyre, Local Government Officer, will outline reasons why in a minute. But before I go any further, as Chairman, I'd like to welcome Mr. Dave Sidwick to the Police and Crime Panel and congratulate him on his election in May of this year. And Dave has been shadowing the panel for about 2 years now, so he's well up to speed with the way that the panel works and the way it does its business. And more importantly, we as a panel are looking forward to working with Dave over probably the next 3 years for the good and benefit of the people of Dorset. So if I could ask Mark to do item 1 on the agenda, please, which is apologies, roll call and meeting etiquette. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Chair. If I start off, if I introduce myself firstly, I'm Mark Eyre. I'm Dorset Council's Service Manager for Assurance and the lead officer for the Dorset Police and Crime Panel. If I pick up first of all on the matter of it being an informal meeting, I'll just explain that briefly. The legislation that enabled formal meetings to be held virtually during COVID was not extended. Because of ongoing restraints related to social distancing, it's not been possible for the panel to meet physically. As such, it will be an informal rather than a formal meeting. There'll be no formal decisions made by the panel today. So, for instance, the minutes from the last meeting will be signed off at the next formal meeting. The content of the agenda today is one of scrutiny and not decision making. So hopefully that provides a brief explanation. In terms of etiquette, if I could ask panel members please to keep their mics and videos off other than where they're speaking. In terms of attendance, what I'll do now, I'll just run through who's with us today. And if I could ask, as I get to each one of you, if you could just turn your camera on and your mic on and just briefly introduce yourself, please. If I start with members of the panel, Councillor Barrow. Are you here, Councillor Barrow?
Morning all, I'm Councillor Pete Barrow. I represent Radipole Ward in Weymouth and I'm Councillor on Dorset Council.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Dove.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Dove with BCP Council. I'm Vice Chair of this panel and also sit on the BCP's Sub-Complaints Committee.
Thank you. Councillor Farquhar.
George Farquhar, BCP Council, and I'm proud to represent Boscombe East and Puxtown in Bournemouth.
Thank you. Councillor Fry.
Good morning, Les Fry representing Dorchester West.
Thank you. Councillor Gorringe.
Good morning all. I'm Councillor Gorringe, Barry Gorringe, and I represent St Leonard's and St Ives.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Councillor Haynes. I represent Camper Cliffs Ward in BCP Council, and I'm also portfolio holder for community safety for BCP Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Howell.
Good morning. I'm Mark Howell. I'm councillor for Poole Town Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jesperson.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Sherry Jesperson. I represent Hillport and Upper Tarrants Ward in Dorset Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Good morning to you. Congratulations, David Sidwick, on your appointment. I'm David Taylor, councillor for Dorset, Chelmsford Mary, and also Dorset Town Council, and of course, member of the PCP. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Councillor Trent.
Yeah, I'm Councillor Trent. I represent Oldney and Bourne Valley Ward on BCP Council.
Thank you very much. We've had an apology from Ian McVie, who's one of our independent members. He sent his apologies. He may be able to join us a bit later in the meeting, but he's not here at this present time. If I now move on to the Office for the Police and Crime Commissioner, if I start off with the Police and Crime Commissioner, please, and David Sidwick.
So I'm David Sidwick. I'm the Dorset Police and Crime Commissioner representing the people of Dorset.
Thank you very much. And Simon Bullock.
Good morning, colleagues. I'm Simon Bullock. I'm the Chief Executive to the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you. Adam Harold.
Good morning. I'm Adam Harold. I'm the Director of Operations for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you. And Julie Strange.
Good morning. I'm Julie Strange. I'm the Chief Finance Officer for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you very much. And then finally, I'll just go through the officers from Dorset Council that are present. Jonathan Mayer. Are you here, Jonathan?
Jonathan, you're on mute.
Right, sorry about that, rookie error. Good morning, I'm Jonathan Mayer. I'm the Corporate Director for Legal and Democratic, and I'm also your monitoring officer. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Elaine Tibble.
Good morning, I'm Elaine Tibble. I'm a Senior Democratic Services Officer with Dorset Council.
Thank you very much. So I've just checking if is there anybody else that I've missed from that roll call?
Is Jim with us?
No, Jim's not.
Oh, okay. Right.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
I am with you. Morning, Mark. Sorry, morning,
Sorry.
Chair.
Apologies.
Welcome, Jim. Covert as ever.
Sneaking in on the blind side there, or maybe at about 8:30 tonight.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jim McManus. I'm Corporate Director for Finance and Commercial with Dorset Council and Panel Advisor.
Thanks very much, Jim. Thanks for being with us as well. Appreciate that. Mark, item 2, declarations of interest.
Yeah, if I could just check, please, with members of the panel that there's nothing to declare. I'll just give you a few moments to do so. Okay, that's nothing to declare, Chair.
Right, thank you. Item 3, public participation.
And we've not received anything.
Thank you very much. Right, we move on to item 4 now, which is a chance for Dave to take centre stage and to outline how his campaign manifesto, his successful campaign manifesto, will morph into the police and crime plan, which he will deliver over his tenure for the good and benefit of the people of Dorset. Dave, congratulations again and welcome to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everybody. Good morning to the panel and indeed the wider people of Dorset who are watching. I'd just like to do a couple of things before I start the actual paper that we have. One is to pay tribute to my team, to Simon, Adam and Julie, and the wider team back at the ranch. And the reason I say that is it is never easy when you get a new boss. It's certainly never easy when you get a new boss who's parachuted in the day after the old boss goes. And I'd like to thank them for firstly being open to new ways of doing things. I remember the second week we had a 6-hour meeting talking about the police and crime plan in order to get it up and running, etc., etc. So thank you for the welcome. Thank you for the intent. And we will keep it going and keep it going forward. Thank you, everybody. The second thing I'd like to do is, this is very much the first panel meeting after the election. So I thought I'd reassure the panel and slay some dragons which were brought up during the election. I think this is important because you have to understand that some of them were about integrity, and therefore I thought I'd better address it. So the first one is there was a piece of misinformation about how I funded the 3 years, basically learning about what this job's about. I wasn't funded by anybody apart from myself and my wife going back to work for the NHS. So I thought I'd just put that out there. There was no huge pot of money given to me by the Conservative Party. It doesn't work like that. And the same with the election funding. I had to raise every penny by going out and making cases to people. And I also was very clear in my mind that there could be no opportunity for anybody to say, oh, that person has given you a lot of money, therefore they basically can tell you what to do. So I capped the contributions to my election funding. Other things which were said was that I would be enthralled to the Home Secretary. Well, there's no party whip. There is no mechanism by which I can be told what to do. And there's something else, and this matters deeply to me. The ex-police officers on the panel will understand this very clearly, because they all took an oath as police officers to show no fear or favour to anybody. There is a similar oath that is taken by the Police and Crime Commissioner. In fact, it's taken within 10 minutes of becoming the Police and Crime Commissioner. And that says two clear things. It says that you will work for the whole of the people of Dorset, which is what I will do. It also says that the Chief Constable is operationally independent, and that I will respect. So I just wanted to basically clear up any misunderstandings which were put about during the election period and make it very clear that I'm not working for the government, I'm not working for the police, I work for only one group of people, which is the people of Dorset. And so I am very grateful for the opportunity to lay out at this early stage what we'll be doing. Very clearly, about 3 years ago, I came up with a vision that Dorset should be the safest county in the UK. And the mission is to cut crime and antisocial behaviour. And that for me is based on 4 values: one of justice, one of fairness, one of community, and one of respect. And we've taken that forward and we've basically put it into the space which we needed to in order to start the creation of the Police and Crime Plan. So some cynics might say it's unusual for a politician, but I'm sticking to what I said during the election, and that is what I intend to deliver for the people of Dorset. So I commend to the panel the Police and Crime Plan paper and the first 100 days update. And basically what I'll do is I'll paraphrase a lot of it. You've all had it to read. Basically, I was elected on the 6th of May. That was after 3 years talking to hundreds of people, regularly attending this police and crime panel. I remember in the days we could all get together. For 2 years, I used to come and observe, and we were all physical. And hopefully those days will come back soon. I also spent 18 months. I'm very grateful for the current Chief Constable who gave me such access, and indeed any other candidate, the access to go out with anybody in Dorset Police. And I made the most of it to see practice and inform the election manifesto. Since I started about 46, 47 days ago, I've received hundreds of items of correspondence from the public. I've also received detailed briefings from the force and indeed the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. So that's all to bring me up to speed as quickly as possible with what I need to know. I'm very clear that we can achieve the safest county. I'm very clear that we'll get there by cutting crime and antisocial behaviour and by putting victims and communities first. And we've now got an uplift. And that, I believe, will help us with the increase in resources so that the force can actually do that and reduce crime and ASB. So the plan, in theory, the Police and Crime Plan, has to be published by the 31st of March. What I've done is I've said very clearly to my team is I would like to achieve that earlier. Now, what I've got to consider is I've got to consider the views of the local community, which obviously I got through the election process. I need to prepare a draft of the plan and consult with the Chief Constable, and also to send that to the Police and Crime Panel, to you, in order to get reports and recommendations from the panel. And once I've got those reports and recommendations, I publish those to the public. So there's legislation which very clearly states what's got to be in the Police and Crime Plan. That's not limited to what I deliver as my objectives. There's also the policing that the Chief Constable will provide and the means by which he'll be measured. Bearing in mind all these requirements, and it's balanced alongside the extensive preparation that we've already started and which I already did on the election trail, we've got this fast track approach, which means we are able to facilitate an early delivery of the plan by the end of October 2021. What I will be doing is I won't just rest on the laurels of what I found out during the election time. I will be making additional consultation over the summer event season and taking advantage of that. Now, there's no requirement on me to basically talk about the first 100 days of office, but I'm keen to ensure that actually the public know that basically we've hit the ground running and they can better understand the direction of travel for my office. It's all based on the clear vision and the research that I put in place at the start. So we're following on with these 6 priorities. The first one was to cut crime and antisocial behaviour. So I want the police to robustly prevent and detect crime and tackle the constant grind of antisocial behaviour so people across Dorset see a clear difference and feel safer. Intrinsic to that is about making policing more visible and connected. So we're going to increase the number and visibility of police officers in our neighbourhood teams so the police can again fulfil a prevention role. Connection and connectivity between police and public is something on the election trail which was a constant, and that needs to be improved. We're going to fight violent crime and high harm. So we're going to tackle organised gangs, be tough on drugs, and tackle those high harm incidents which are more hidden, such as child abuse, domestic abuse, hate crime and modern slavery. We're going to pull out and fight rural crime. So I'm going to significantly increase the rural crime team and their capabilities and have specific strategies for crimes and issues affecting the rural community. We're going to put victims and communities first. We're going to support all victims, but particularly the elder people and those who are most vulnerable, and build community strength by working together and addressing those needs. And the last one is one which is kind of a thread going through the others, but it's making every penny count. We want to resource and transform the front line, reduce the administration, so we've got patrol and response teams can spend more time in communities and make the residents feel safer. So those priorities are closely linked and activity is required across all those areas in order to get us to the state of being the safest county. Normally, a police and crime commissioner has 4 years to make a difference. I've had 25% of the time locked off. I've got 3 years. So my ambition is basically to put in place a plan which has a longer time period and a single term of office which has been dramatically shortened. We're working together with the force and partner agencies to bring together the content for the draft plan. And this follows initial conversations with our key stakeholders where we've demonstrated already a strong synergy between my ambitions and those of some of the partner agencies. The local priorities actually, which we've identified, also have a close overlap with the national priorities as outlined by the government. And I've spoken to the force specifically on this subject about the overlap, and we are together confident that we can deliver. So what I've decided is to give as much of an insight as I could. So there was an early insight to members of the Police and Crime Panel in an introductory meeting in early June. We're working to finalise the consultation material for this summer's events. And basically that will happen so I am best informed of the views of the people of Dorset. Now, COVID-19 will restrict that to a certain extent, but hopefully after July the 19th, when Freedom Day comes, we'll be able to actually consult in the way that we used to. And a large number of people will then be able to hear about the emerging plan and share their views. So that's the overall take on direction, if you like. What I'd like to do is talk about the first 100 days progress. What I'm going to do is at the end of that 100 days, I will proactively and clearly communicate that both to the internal and external audiences. And also, as we go out on the engagement work, I can feed some of it into that. So about 6 weeks in, we are, and the following has been achieved. So if we take the first priority of cutting crime and ASB, something that I was very aware of was where the ASB hotspots were. So I have begun regular meetings to address that, to have a joined up focus on those hotspot areas. So this is including meetings with partner agencies such as the local authorities, the chief executives, and key community safety personnel, as well as in addition to the local neighbourhood policing teams with the responsibility for those areas. So far I've visited Poole and Bournemouth, the hotspots areas there. I'm also been down to Weymouth, had a significant meeting there, and I'm having a walkabout next week. So by the end of 100 days, I'll have visited all the priority areas, and I will also have spoken to the neighbourhood policing team, councillors, and other community representatives. Because the key to getting this right is joined up working across all the agencies. Also, what's happened is I've been briefed on Dorset Police's review of school education and support. Basically, from my work as a school governor, I knew that the issue around drugs in particular and the communication around drugs wasn't landing with our young people. And so there's been a review undertaken to look at how we can get better and more impactful education in that space. Key partners will be brought together, and by the time the panel meets next time, we'll be able to discuss the next steps in this important area of preventative work. I've also taken on some of the key issues which residents came to me about, things like e-scooters and also catalytic converters. And the panel will be aware that there is a greater emphasis on addressing those issues from Dorset Police, and you'll see more of that as time goes on. So that's what we've done so far for the first priority. For the second, which is about making policing more visible and connected, the key, absolute key to that is the dispensation of the uplift. And so I've been working with chief officers to ensure the maximisation of that uplift into community policing. I've received detailed briefings to date on recruitment and training, and also we're looking to try and secure additional investment. We also hope, and we're having discussions about this at the moment, is that we're able to increase special constable recruitment and also expand the police cadet scheme. I have always been very supportive of the concept of police cadets. It has always been a bemusement to me that Dorset was the last place in the country to get any, and we only have one unit at the moment. The desire is for cadet units to be established in Poole and Weymouth, and I'm urging the force to bring forward its plans in those areas, because actually I want as many young people to benefit from this sort of thing as possible. If we turn to fighting violent crime and high harm, I've already agreed to fund You First for the provision of an independent stalking advocacy caseworker, an ISAC, for the next 2 years. I'm very aware of the severe distress that stalking and harassment can cause victims. It's also that these are very complex for the police to deal with. So the ISAC helps to bring together key information and partners, as well as dedicated case conferences to ensure that we get true justice for these victims. I've also been very clear with the force, and we've had a lot of discussion about the fact that stalking prevention orders need to be used. And I'll continue to support the role of vulnerability lawyers, which we have, in order to make certain that we prioritise and use those orders, as well as domestic violence protection orders and sexual harm protection orders. Basically, if we've got the tools, we're going to use them. I'm also, at this moment, working with the force and local authorities to prepare bids for a range of national funds, such as, for example, the third round of the Safer Streets funding. There is also other things that I'm doing, asking the force what is going to be their response to violence against women and girls, particularly as we look forward to the restrictions falling off later in the summer. And I hope to bring more news in that regard next time we meet. I've got something else actually in this space which I'd like to bring the panel on board. I'm very clear that my priority is working for the people of Dorset. There are, however, a number of national portfolios through the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. My background in the pharmaceutical industry and the work I did during the election, coupled with some real life experience, means that I am very aware that one of the biggest issues that we have is around addiction. It is around addiction to alcohol. It is also around addiction to substances, and dare I say it, also gambling addiction. So I've taken a joint role as leader for the alcohol and substance misuse portfolio nationally. So I will basically be moving priorities forward in that space, which will also work for the people of Dorset. If we can seriously address those issues, then we also have a really, really, really good chance of addressing both violent and serious crime, but also antisocial behaviour. In that space, we'll be looking at what's appropriate and also connecting with other portfolios to tackle country lines and drug dealing and make certain that we are robust in dealing with them. The fourth priority was one which I know had great meaning to a lot of the people in Dorset, and that is fighting rural crime. Now, I can announce that we've secured a doubling of the rural crime team, and there's going to be a further commitment to strengthen that team in the coming years. So that is a direct answer to what I said in the election manifesto, that I wanted to significantly increase the rural crime team. We're doing it. We're doubling it this year. It's hoped that that will be further assisted by the introduction of rural specials, and we're exploring that at the moment with the force. I'm going to have roundtable events in the weeks and months to come with other agencies, other key rural partners, because I want to scope my plans for the Country Watch initiative, which, if you remember, included things like the reintroduction of the idea of a parish constable and also a equine neighbourhood watch. As a candidate, I successfully lobbied the Pet Theft Task Force. I successfully lobbied on pet theft, and we have a Pet Theft Task Force now nationally, which has been launched. I've sought to provide reassurance to the public on the level of current dog theft within Dorset, but I've also made certain that we will prevent this and make as much noise about prevention as possible. I'm watching with interest what is happening in Gloucester, where they are now linking up to a doggy DNA database, and we'll see where that goes. There's two priorities left, which are critical. One is putting victims and communities first. So basically, I'll be meeting with figures in the neighbourhood watch schemes to best understand what they need to be supported for the future. I'd very much like to increase and strengthen neighbourhood watches. It's been shown academically that they reduce crime by about 26 to 28% where such schemes are in operation. I'd like to build this, and I think we've got an opportunity. Because of COVID, we actually have the concept of volunteering put back very much on the agenda in a way that we didn't have before. We also have community spirit, which came together in order to look after each other. And I'm hoping those things together will mean that we can drive volunteers for Neighbourhood Watch. And one of the things that I know already is happening in some of the places that I've been is they're reaching out to younger members of the public in order to see if they will join Neighbourhood Watch. As in some places we are getting very senior, let's put it that way, in the makeup. I'm also very clear that the business community needs a focus on particularly retail crime. So I'm starting to meet with business representatives and bodies to understand how the current forces approach to crime works and how it may be improved. And on a similar strand, I'm also looking at cybercrime in that context. I'll be continuing to highlight issues that affect Dorset's communities throughout the year and supporting National Awareness Weeks. Finally, if we talk about the last one, which is about making every penny count. In the first 100 days, I've made certain that I understand the existing OPCC and force financial and audit arrangements. I'm assured that they are fit for purpose. I will be reviewing the joint governance arrangements and discussing this with the new Chief Constable once appointed. I also consider the value for money profiles. These are produced for Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, and I'm due to be briefed ahead of the forthcoming inspections of Dorset Police, which happen in the autumn. So that's where we are at the moment with the 100 days. The next step is my team will create a draft of the police and crime plan across the summer. This will then be shared with you as the police and crime panel at the earliest possible opportunity, so we can take into account your reports and recommendations and consider them. It will also be informed by consultation activity, which will take place in the summer, and details about this with the dates will be published in due course. It will also be shared directly with the panel for your information. So a formal update will be presented to a future police and crime panel meeting. And basically, I will publicise achievements secured by myself and my office within the first 100 days when we get there in late August. So in summary, where we are is that we are working very hard to develop the police and crime plan. It's well underway. We're on track to issue it for the end of October, which will be several months ahead of the statutory deadline. We'll continue to consult and engage widely with the public, Dorset Police, local authorities and other partners. We've started well. We need to continue that momentum, and members are asked to note the report. Thank you very much indeed. If I can pass you back to you, Mr. Chairman, for any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave, for that honest and frank outline to what you've done over the last couple of weeks and what you're planning to do, and your key drive, which is to cut crime and antisocial behaviour. The panel, I know, have got some questions that they would like to ask you on behalf of the people of Dorset. May I ask Les Fry first, because Les, you actually submitted a question. Could you ask that particular question now, please?
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, David. That's very interesting. My question to you is, during your election campaign, you committed to making Dorset the safest county in the country. However, 4 of the 5 South West Police and Crime Commissioners also committed to that same pledge. How do you intend to achieve this pledge, and by what mechanism, ONS, etc., do you intend to score the progress, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Les. So you're absolutely right. I did say that it would be the safest place in the country. You're absolutely right. Every other force, including 4 out of the 5 closest to me, will be saying exactly the same thing. I make no apologies for that. I am going to drive forward in order to address it. The issue that we have is that if we don't set a vision, we don't have anywhere to go. There was no upper vision, if you like, that I could see for Dorset in the past. So that very much is an aspirational goal. We are going to drive for that. We are going to look to achieve it. It is achievable. If Devon and Cornwall can do it, we can do it. And we will basically get there by putting the crime and ASB back in its box and basically fulfilling the elements of the police and crime plan that I'll be bringing forward. Now, you basically asked how we're going to measure it as well. Well, to answer that question, we're currently working on the KPIs, and you'll be aware from my business background that outcomes are critical to my definition of success. I have no doubt that we can achieve this, and we'll craft milestones for the panels so they can note the change. This will be outlined in the police and crime panel meeting later in the year. But ultimately, Mr. Chairman and Les, it is about how the residents of Dorset feel. I want them to feel safer and more secure. This will take into account not only crime actuality, but also the fear of crime. And this will be reflected in my success at the ballot box. And I intend to ensure that they are happy to continue with the PCC on a charge to cut crime and antisocial behaviour, and with a group of determined crime fighters in Dorset Police making it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you for that, Dave. May.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
And I really welcome your report that you've actually just outlined to us, very comprehensive. My question relates to frontline policing. This was something that you had mentioned as part of your campaign. So could you outline what you actually mean by frontline policing? Are we talking about NPT, or are we talking about a wider spectrum than just NPT? Thank you.
So the policing definition of frontline is uniformed and non-uniformed police officers, staff and volunteers who deliver services directly to the public. The public, however, use the term frontline to refer to police officers who perform a community or response function. So those officers, in effect, they want to see visible on the streets. In the election campaign, it is those who I was referring to as frontline, which is not the complete picture. However, it is what the public are concerned about, and that needs addressing. As PCC, I obviously recognise that policing is more complicated with balance required. And so we're going to have officers protecting us from harm across a range of places, from our high streets on a Saturday night or when the football's on, and to the frontier of cyberspace. So obviously, this will be around things like child sexual abuse. It will be around things like fraud. But ultimately, from the point of view of the frontline policing that I referred to in the election, and which the public want to see, it is those who are in the neighbourhood policing team, visible on the streets, and they can see them protecting them. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Chairman. I have no supplementary.
Thank you for that. Just out of interest, what do you see as the difference between what is actual frontline policing as opposed to, as you point out, cybercrime?
Well, by the police definition, they would both be frontline policing. I used the term, actually, I didn't use the term that often. I usually use the term, if you look at the priorities, it talks about visibility in the community. So I was talking about very much the neighbourhood policing team, the rural crime team, the patrol element of the force. The things that people saw, the things that people said they were concerned about. Now that's been equated as frontline, but actually, yeah, we know very clearly that we have frontline police officers who spend their days in the POLIT team, looking at child sexual abuse, which by the by is very much on the increase, and that will be resourced as part of Uplift as well.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
But Mike, sorry, if I can just say one more word on that. If we don't address the needs of the public and what they feel their policing needs are with the Uplift, then basically we're not doing a good service to the people of Dorset. And that's why I've said that we need to maximise the neighbourhood policing team.
Yeah, I suppose the follow-on question to that is, how do you square what the public want with what the public need?
Well, that is the squaring between, we're going on to I believe another question, but that's the squaring between the national policing priorities, which looks at the national threats, and also the Home Office 6 priorities, which have come down, and our more local priorities as defined by my plan and the public. Now, actually, what you'll see is there is a very close overlap, and I've already had those discussions with the force.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that, Dave. Useful debate. You stated in your sort of campaign that in order to cut crime, you will ensure that we increase frontline policing, as you just outlined, the NPTs, rural crime team, etc. Yet you also state PCCs cannot tell the police how to do their job. So how do you intend to square the circle, or this circle, without stepping into the area of the chief constable?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So PCC set the strategic direction of the force. That's based on the needs of the people through the priorities of the police and crime plan. So it is about what should be done. That very clearly is what I've said, is this is what should be done. Now, I don't necessarily say how it should be done, and that's where the rub comes. So it's well within my remit to say, this is what we need. Let's talk about the resources you need to do that and how you're going to do that, for them and to reassure me that it's going to get done. So, for example, it's well within my remit to highlight the needs of rural communities and to question the level of resources required in order to do that. Such a statement does not impact on the operational independence of the Chief Constable. It is not about telling him on Saturday night, I want you to put half your force in Sturminster Newton. That is not within my remit. But it is within my remit to say there is a community concern about the level of rural policing. We need to do something about that, which is in effect what I've done.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Tony Trent.
Right. Bring it up. The PCC's election campaign 6-point plan highlights that the first priority will be for the police to provide a robust focus on cutting violent crime and ASB. What have Dorset Police been getting wrong in this area to date, in his opinion?
Nothing. I have immense respect for Dorset Police and I've spent over 18 months in practice with them. Now, though, there's a need for a PCC plan more closely connected with the residents of Dorset, given a future strategic direction and prioritisation of resources that's seen through the prism of the people, not the police. Dorset is and will continue to be a safe place to live, work and visit, but the demand impact in our area is changing, and it's important that the police change with it. So I've spent 3 years basically listening to people across our county, and now we've got an opportunity. The opportunity afforded by the Police Uplift programme to act on those areas which the people have told me about. And so I've asked the Chief Constable to prioritise our new resources accordingly. So the classic example was we were not doing a lot for antisocial behaviour. Now we are. Now we will be able to.
Yeah. Can I have a supplementary on that? Because the biggest issue with antisocial behaviour is avoiding people being, young people in particular, being restless and not having things to occupy them. And is there any plan to support things like youth services and efforts to actually draw young people away from antisocial behaviour and into more constructive pursuits? Is there any plan to attend to that side?
Thank you, Tony. I haven't gone into it in detail because it's more long term, but we have a whole project called Fix the Future, which is about partly exactly that. Antisocial behaviour in Dorset is driven by a couple of different groups of people. One group is exactly as you outlined. It is our young people who unfortunately fall into, you would suggest out of boredom. I would suggest there's a number of reasons, that being one of them, who fall into doing antisocial behaviour. So we will be addressing that. Now, I'm very interested in projects which have early intervention, in order to basically those who start falling into doing antisocial behaviour, that we actually address that. I can give you an example of a 12-year-old. He was at 12, he fell into doing antisocial behaviour. At 14, he's running drugs to a county line of 9 of his fellows. We have to stop that passage, if you like. So early intervention and diversion is something that I'm absolutely into. I see my role, though, as a pump primer. One of bringing people together in order to address that. I do not have the budget to put back every youth club in Dorset, for example. The government is making more money available in that regard, I'm aware of, and we need to take advantage of that. But I'm going to do what I can in my space to bring people together, to look at early intervention for young people and diversion for them. I see that as an intimate part of the PCC's role.
Right, thank you.
Mark.
Yes, thank you and welcome. Yeah, my question is, you've stated that you want the public to be able to contact the police easily when needed. What commissioning plans does the PCC have in order to achieve this aspiration?
Thank you for that, Mark, and welcome. I understand it's your first gig today. That's right.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got some things happening. Some of this is thinking about how to do things differently, and we're having discussions about that. The connectivity between the police and the communities is hugely important to me. It was, if I said there was one thing that everybody told me during the election campaign, it was that we don't feel connected. It didn't matter whether it was farmers, it didn't matter whether it was the BAME community, it didn't matter who it was. It was this issue of feeling not quite as well connected as they could be. So we're going to have a range of plans to address this challenge, some of which I outlined earlier. But there's a big one, right? This is going to include new innovations. So we are moving to the single online home platform, which will improve our web and internet-based communication with the public. We're also going to be bringing forward the idea of, in our rural areas, parish constables and rural specials. And we'll be trying to place local people in those roles. So we've got local communities with local policing roles. Look, there's quite a lot of work going on in this space, but after 47 days, it's a little early for me to give you everything. It will come forward in the police and crime plan in September. But the one thing I will say is I'm very pleased that the force is moving apace now into single online home. Something like 60 to 70% of calls to 101 aren't actually police calls. And that's what slows down the connection there for everybody else. And if we can get the connections there right, it will make it easier to connect with everybody, including those who don't use the internet and who do want to make a phone call. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Certainly, as speaking as a councillor, we need to improve I think the connectivity and also distribution of calls and make sure that the public help the public to direct their inquiries to the appropriate organisation, or at least have a system for doing that internally between ourselves. One point I'd just like perhaps your opinion on is that I've noticed that the police are saying they don't monitor social media accounts in terms of collecting information, responding, but actually it's a fact of life that lots of people do raise issues through social media. So it seems to me that that somehow needs to be addressed in some way, that kind of gap, because part of the police role is to be investigative and to understand what's happening in the wider community, I would have thought.
So I think the issue there is we need a report. There is, for example, a situation that I'm aware of which occurred recently, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where there was quite a lot of chatter on social media, but nobody reported a thing to the police. Now, the problem you've got is how much of that chatter is real, how much of it isn't. We've had those issues in the past. So we've got to encourage people that social media is great for awareness amongst you, but please, can one of you make a report to the police? Because they won't do it otherwise.
I don't want to ignore your time up on this, but I would put the public is encouraged to just report information to the police for information purposes as well as actual crime purposes. So one would also, I think, expect to some degree, accepting limited resources, that the police do seek out information themselves on social media. But I will leave that hanging there and allow somebody to ask the next question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Pete Barrow.
Morning. Thank you, Chair. Morning, David.
Good morning.
Congratulations again on your win and
Thank
your new role. really pleased to hear your focus on antisocial behaviour. I was heavily involved with the situation on Weymouth seafront during the lockdown, and I saw at first hand the appalling antisocial behaviour caused by a small number of individuals with serious addiction issues, and the truly appalling impact this had on the residents' lives. I mean, it's no lie to say that some of the residents on Lennox Street and the area around there were really seriously affected by this. And no doubt you've, as part of your work in reading your way into your role and your campaigning and your consultation with the public, you're fully aware of that. So the question
Peter,
is,
let me reassure you, yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm very aware of that area of Weymouth. I'm also aware of the issues around the harbour as well. So
the question is, you commented during the election that you intended to address effective rehabilitation for those with addiction issues. Can I ask how you plan to go about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll talk a little bit about the national work as well. Firstly, by understanding what works and commissioning accordingly. At this moment in time, we have people who have got their addictions. We have various mechanisms of rehabilitation. We have places which are effectively HMOs, which say they are houses of rehabilitation. But actually, the actual rehabilitation element, I could probably write on the back of a fag packet. So I think we have to actually understand who is doing what in this space, what works, what doesn't, and commission more of what works and find ways of basically closing down what doesn't work. So basically, I'll be looking to work with partners to understand the value of what's being commissioned currently. And thirdly, with time, basically we'll be trying to address it, but also we can't get this right with just the police force. We can't enforce our way out of it. We have to have ways of addressing this deeply entrenched societal problem. And it goes back to some of the things I was talking to in the 100-day plan about impactful education for kids. Because I would take that further. I would say that you also have to make them aware not only of drugs, but also the issues of alcohol, and take a public health approach in that regard to what they're doing to their bodies, basically. I don't think a policeman standing at the front and saying, here's all the drugs, well, cheers, thanks, we know that, and you're going to get locked up, has much effect. But if you tell them that they are going to get psychosis, they're going to possibly lose their bladders, as I know 2 young 20-year-olds have done because of their addiction to ketamine, or that they're going to die on the floor of the O2 like my friend's daughter did. I think it's those messages we need to give to our young people in order to help them not get into drugs and alcohol. And then for those who are already addicted, we need to make certain that whatever we do works. In order to help them. And for those who either won't engage, can't engage, and are making everybody's life a misery, that's where the enforcement comes in. So to me, it's very much a 3-pronged approach. So it will probably be of interest to the panel. I mentioned it earlier that I'm the joint lead for the alcohol and substance misuse portfolio. We'll probably change the name of that, by the way, if we have support, to the addiction portfolio. And we'll be discussing suitable initiatives at our first meeting in August of what we can try and do on a national basis. There needs to be a wraparound approach, though. It's not just about the addiction itself. We need to basically have a wraparound approach that we can link in with agencies which will address the education, the health, the housing. I know the Lantern Trust, for example, in Weymouth does really good work. The fact that it's a hub, that is happening across the county again. Now there's a hub going to start in BCP. Which will also do that joined up work. There'll be more detail on my approach to this and rehabilitation later on in the Police and Crime Plan.
Thank you very much. It's reassuring to hear that, and the best of luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Dave Taylor.
Thank you for that. Excuse the noise in the background. I've got some building next door, which is really annoying. Question 6 is us, which is the fact that the PC has talked about the PCs and analysed all 43 forces to assess the linkage between their crime plans and delivery effective policing. What did he learn and how will he shape his view for Dorset? Again, apologies for the noise. And I've got two other questions I'd like to ask privately to you, please, David, outside of the meeting, which I could address with you at a later time, if that's possible.
Yes, I'll always take private questions. If they're operational, I will defer to the force. But if they're within my remit or I can help, then I will, because that's the way I'm operating with everybody else. So that's the way we'll work. Thank you for that. Yes, it was interesting. It started off basically, I wasn't expecting to find a difference. All right, I wasn't expecting to find differences between forces. And I wasn't expecting to find much difference between crime plans, but there actually was. I found it very helpful because it informed what best practice to me looked like. I found interesting correlations with the clarity of the plan, the issues, there was also issues around frontline policing ratios, and obviously funding. So for example, Metropolitan Police in London get over 80p per person per day for policing. We get 45p, and there is a spectrum in between, and that's something which I unpicked, and is something which is informing my lobbying, if you like, about better funding for Dorset, because there's no doubt about it. From a national funding formula perspective, we basically have to fund much more ourselves than we should be. However, I'm very clear also that delivery doesn't just flow from the strength of the police and crime plan. It's rather the focus and the strength of the PCC, the relationship with the chief constable, how their offices interlink, the desire and ability to recognise the validity of the police and crime plan. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, but you have to get, to my mind, you have to get the basics right. What I see, though, in Dorset, which gives me great enthusiasm, is it's not present everywhere, I can tell you, is we've got an aligned and collaborative public sector. So the way the local authorities and the police are now working is much better than it used to be. COVID has dramatically helped with that. Dare I say, I also think technology has. We can now get together in a way that we couldn't before, and that also is driving a much more collaborative focus on our problems. So I'm actually pretty enthused by that. I think that will bode well for us for the future. Did that sort of help you out?
Thank you, yes, but apologies for the noise. I will go around there and tell him off in a minute.
Thanks, David.
David, just to sort of take that a little bit further, if you wouldn't mind. So what did you see elsewhere in the country that you are intending to implement in Dorset for the good and benefit?
Right. I've got things that I would like to implement. We need to gain some funding for it. Things like a violence reduction unit. There's something like 18 forces were granted money from the government. Some of the others have basically introduced those anyway. I'd like to see that. I'm kind of talking about my plan before I put my plan together, Mike. I'll give you one more. I am very interested in domestic abuse, in addressing that particular issue. I know that some forces have what they call high harms unit, where they have the police, a mental health nurse, and a substance abuse nurse all working together in order to address it, particularly in the context of domestic abuse. I'm interested in unpicking that and looking at that and seeing if we could bring that idea to Dorset as well. So that gives you a couple of ideas that I've seen elsewhere.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Dave. George.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Commissioner, and congratulations on your election, and also for the work that you put in your first 100 days. I listened with great interest to your report and read it as well. A term which kept coming up again, and you said it yourself in your presentation, was robust. In this particular context, it's robust in dealing with drug dealing and county lines. My question actually relates to what actions you plan to take, whether they're robust or not, to rectify the disproportionality issue which we have within the Dorset Police, and that's been identified in numerous reports over quite a number of years.
Thank you, George. And yeah, very good question. And absolutely, dare I say it, is one of the key issues for me. So what I've done is I've highlighted my desire to understand the current issues with the Chief Constable, and basically I'm getting a briefing on this next week. The reason it's next week is there's been some force commissioned work around this area. They've actually done two things. They've done a piece of work with a market research firm. They've also done a quite considerable piece of work which is yet to come to fruition with Cambridge University and a gentleman called Professor Larry Sherman, who is probably the most eminent criminologist in this country and possibly the world, actually. So he's a big cheese in this area, and Dorset has basically gone to work with him in order to understand. So for me, at the moment, I need to more fully understand the issues. And you're right, these issues have been endured for several years, if not decades. And so I need to understand it before I can set out my approach to it. But let me tell you where I am on it. Disproportionality is not necessarily the same as discrimination. So let's be clear. What we need to do is understand the issues to remove any reporting artifacts, so we can see the reasons for any remaining disproportionality. So I'm clear that we need to understand it. I think my comments are mirroring those of Wendy Williams, Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue for this area, and it's the same take she's got on it. Let's make certain we understand it. Once we understand it, though, you have my absolute commitment to tackling any issues that arise, as I'm clear that Dorset Police must deliver a legitimate service to every single community in Dorset. So basically, I want to understand it, and if we've got disproportionality, which is discrimination, I want to fix it. So it's a work in progress, George, and I'm hoping to come back with more information later in the year.
I appreciate that, and thanks very much for that, rather than picking up on the headlines, which are, shall we say, not proportionate in many cases. So I really appreciate it if you'll come back to the panel and report your findings, and I think that would be very useful to go public with that as well, and it would be useful to not only the panel but also the wider public to actually have an investigation into the difference, as you say, between disproportionality and discrimination.
Thanks, George.
Thanks very much, George. Mark, can you put that on the forward work plan, please?
Noted, Chair, thanks.
Mike, can I ask a supplementary to that one, please? Thank you, Commissioner, and congratulations on your post. I think there's two issues that need to be understood around what it is that the report that came to the panel in September needs to identify. One is disproportionality, and why do we have it? And the second is whether discrimination is part of that disproportionality. I understand that you've said that if it's discrimination based, that will be addressed. I'd like to understand if there is disproportionality not linked to discrimination, why that is, and what it is that we can do about it, please. I think also it did come to the panel back in September. I appreciate you've just obviously taken on the mantle and the reins of all of this in the last few weeks, but it has been nearly a year, therefore, when we have our next panel meeting. So I'd like really, I appreciate going on the forward work plan, for us to understand when it will come back. This has been an issue which is causing concern for a great number of people, not just people of colour, not just people who work and live in the area, but people who visit the area. So if that could be done with haste, that would be really, really appreciative. Thank you.
I think it's fair to say that I'm moving quick as I can, and quicker than it has moved before. Let's put it that way.
On me, it's not a criticism. It's just really to emphasise the panel's commitment as well as yours, and the reassurance that perhaps our public needs. So thank you.
And thank you again for your honest views on that, David. Really, really useful and informative. And as you've heard, we'll put that on our forward work plan, and we will go around that boy once more to see how you're progressing within the foreseeable future. So that's this year, in effect. Les.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, I welcome your plan and your draft, the draft details that we've been given now and your priorities. One area I do disagree with you on, and you're aware of that, is the uplift. To me, it's just replacing officers that we've lost for many years. The numbers when I joined are pretty well the same as when I left 3 years ago. And these are just replacing those officers. But my question, given your commitments in your election campaign and since becoming the PCC, what direction will you be giving to the Chief Constable in terms of what the police will not be doing, and in particular the challenge of the current national police priorities of managing calls for service response investigation against the Thrive model rather than being, in your words, crime fighters?
I think it would be, well, let's first of all address your first comments, Les. I'm not certain that I agree from the point of view of policing has changed since that time as well, and the needs of policing has changed. I think it's very difficult to actually make that equation that you need to replace like for like. That's the first point I'll make. To answer your question, I think it'd probably be useful to give the context of the crime fighters quote and what it was referring to. So I didn't come up with it, actually. It was a serving police officer on one of the busiest nights of the year, probably 2 years ago now, before COVID anyway, because you were allowed to get out, and I was seeing practice with the response team. And I said to him, what do you want? We know there's more officers coming, so don't say officers, don't say money, because that's on its way. What else do you want from a PCC? And he looked at me and he said, make us crime fighters again. Now, I can see that from a number of ways. I can see with COVID, the police have had to police areas which they never had to police before, parties and that sort of stuff. And I don't think that they want to do that. So you can look at it in that area. I can look at it in the area of there are activities in policing which have become more prevalent, such as administration and bureaucracy, and they would like that cut. I absolutely see that. But I also saw it in the context of the previous policing crime plan. And that's why mine is, if you like, much more Ronseal about what I want to do about cutting crime and antisocial behaviour. So that's where that came from. Look, it isn't a binary choice between Thrive, threat, risk and harm, and addressing what the people require. What I found was a need to address ASB that wasn't happening. So what I've done is I've looked at both the national and the local priorities as we've been creating the plan. And I've also discussed it with the police. And there's extensive overlap. So I'm confident we can achieve both. And basically the uplift will help us do that. So I'll reflect that explicitly in the policing crime plan. We'll make certain that the national police priorities, which drive the threat, risk and harm, which you're talking about, and the local priorities, which have come, if you like, from the people via me, we'll basically put a panel in that plan which shows you where they overlap and basically are synergistic. Because you're right, you need to do both.
Is there anything, David, that you won't be doing?
That I want to be doing?
What will not be doing?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, David.
Thanks for that. Just following on, for it's a comment more than anything. You mentioned about police and parties and what have you. It's not their job, but some people's party equals fun. Some people's party equals antisocial behaviour. So there's an issue there. No, it's not an issue there. It's just an observation more than anything.
Sorry, Mike. I was looking at it in the context of COVID specifically.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Some people's parties, you probably need to close them quickly.
Yeah, as always, and we've discussed this in the past, it's a definition of antisocial behaviour, which I don't want to go into now because we've got other things to crack on with, but it's just an observation. Sherry.
Thank you. And welcome, David, and thank you for your presentation. You're obviously off to a very cracking good start here, so that's good to see. The question I was going to ask has pretty well been covered actually just now, so I'd like instead to come back to antisocial behaviour. I'm very pleased to see this highlighted and given such an emphasis as a thread throughout your presentation, and of course domestic violence as well, of course, which is so important. I know that there are antisocial behaviour hotspots in some of our coastal towns, and you've mentioned those. But there are also significant problem areas in some of our smaller towns. And in these smaller communities, antisocial behaviour can have a really very significant impact on people's perception of safety, and because the communities are small, the antisocial behaviour in a way can have a really disproportionate impact on how people feel about their place. I know that you've recently been up in Gillingham visiting the skate park up there, and that's a case in point of what I'm talking about, that it may seem relative to other crime like a small matter, but it's really having an impact on those families near about, the parents and their children, because of the behaviour in that particular part of that town, and they're having a tough time. What I want to ask you about is that when you're formulating your antisocial behaviour plans, can I ask you please to work closely with partners across the region, and in particular with schools, because you need to design solutions, and I think it might be the case that under the heading of antisocial behaviour, you will have a range of problems, and one size might not necessarily fit all. And I think that I have a concern, and you would expect me to say this, bearing the part of the county I represent, I have a concern, as always, that the resources will be drawn down into the south of the county, the Smile, as we call it, the coastal strip, because that's where the perception is that the serious problems are, whereas actually a fairly modest resource could have a very significant impact in the smaller communities, which might have what you might think of as lower level antisocial behaviour, but by definition they might be easier to solve, and they might be easier to bring about an effect. So can I just ask how you're going to go about making sure that we don't have one size fits all solutions to these things? Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. That's a really good question. Actually, it talks very much to the priority that I put in place around rural crime. So if I can explain it this way, the trigger for me in order to pull that out separately, which was not the way it had been done in the past, to be fair, either here or virtually anywhere else, was I was talking to somebody from Scotland, chief inspector, who used to do the rural area just to the west of Dundee. So villages and market towns, very similar to North Dorset, where you are. And he was retiring. And he was retiring because he was fed up not being able to do the job for his people. And the reason he wasn't able to do that was because all the resources had gone to Edinburgh and Glasgow. But fundamentally, there was a lack of empathy about exactly the point that you say. So he described it to me this way. He said, if I have a bunch of kids who are peeing on the war memorial in a village, that upsets the whole village. That makes the whole village feel unsafe. People don't want to go out. People start moving away. The village starts dying. And I need to protect them in the same way as anybody else deserves the right to protection. I see very clearly policing as a universal service, and something that I'm very keen on is making certain that we address that in the rural communities. So whether it's part of the Country Watch approach or part of a general ASB approach, we'll make certain it happens. But let me pick up on something that you said, and that was schools. That is very clearly on my agenda. Particularly, I believe that we need to reach over the top of where a lot of the funding goes at the moment, which is at the teenagers. And we need to reach over the top and talk to primary school kids about what it's like to be a good citizen, because that will help us basically address things like the antisocial behaviour for the future. So that's kind of part of the Fix the Future campaign that we're putting together. Sorry, Sherry, you're on mute.
Sorry, that fits in. That your approach to primary schools is very good to hear. That fits in very well with the whole approach that Dorset Council is taking now of early intervention. The earlier you can intervene before these behaviours become embedded and before they become too serious, and that there is still a possibility of turning things around. So early intervention, very pleased to hear it. Thank you. And thank you very much for your response.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. Good stuff as always. Barry.
I should be there now. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good morning, David, and congratulations on your election.
Thanks, Barry.
I know we've talked a lot this morning about ASB, and probably some of the points that the initiatives you've already mentioned. So basically, what my question is, what initiatives are you proposing to address ASB? And is the PC planning to commission?
So you're right. We have talked about some of them. Let me sort of break it down into two areas. One is for the young. I talked about the fact that I wanted to address early intervention. I wanted to address, to a certain extent, diversion. We are working with developing plans with partners. What we're doing is, and if I can link it to what Sherry's just asked me, what we're doing is we're talking to local authorities, both BCP and Dorset Council, in order to make certain that we link in and are synergistic with what their plans are. So that's, if you like, the kid bit. We've also got the substance abuse piece, the alcohol and substance abuse. And as I say, the first thing that I want to do is I want to map what's available in order to address the issues for those people. There are other things, but forgive me, at 47 days in, I'm going to fudge this one a bit and say they're being developed as part of the police and crime plan, and I'll bring them forward at the next, when we bring forward the plan.
Yeah, I understand that. It's probably a question that, as I say, is a bit short notice if you've only been in office for 47 days. But yeah, I look forward to that at the next meeting. Thank you very much.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, finally, Bobby, you've got some sweeping up questions that you wanted to ask.
I did, and my plan's gone to pot slightly, Commissioner, simply because as we're adding that flesh to your report, as you explain it in detail, you're slowly ticking off all the questions. The first question I did have, which you have actually answered, was the dichotomy about the police plan being on victims, the focus being on victims rather than the vulnerable, the Thrive model, etc. However, having said that, hearing your early intervention plans about getting, and that example of that 12-year-old, you're absolutely subscribing to everything that this panel has been saying and everything that our residents have been saying. Key stage 3 is too late. We need to get in there early. We need to get to them in key stage 2. By the time they are 12 and they go to secondary, we may well have already lost them.
Absolutely
so
right.
I think through that, actually, you therefore are concentrating on the vulnerable, our future young people who are going to enter the judicial system are our vulnerable people that we need to look out at. So thank you so much for acknowledging that and including that within your plan. But there were a couple of other things that I was going to ask for. One was the definition of frontline policing, which is going to be your working definition. So I wouldn't mind if you could perhaps email that to us. And that's really because we can then compare apples with apples. And when you're referring to frontline policing, we understand what it is that you are referring to when we scrutinise you, please. The last one was, and I'm asking you because it may sound operational, but I'm asking you in terms of being accountable to the electorate, but also the person that sets up the budget each year and provides that a certain amount of budget, therefore, to the police chief constable. And it's also to establish, sorry, go on. So it's to establish a minimum number of police officers that you would like to maintain to keep Dorset Police running and meet the needs plus those expectations of our public. so that the business of Dorset Police can be carried out in a manner that they would like to see.
So you'd like me to nail my colours to a minimum amount that I want, is that right?
Not today, because I appreciate you've literally just walked in through the door.
That's good, because I was going to say that.
But it's something that actually I'd like you to bring back, so that when we do scrutinise you, as I say, we're comparing apples with apples, pears with pears. We know where you're coming from, you know where we're coming from, and we can have those really frank discussions that need to be had, and we can support each other in moving forward as well.
Okay, well, what I will say about that is that's fine. I understand what you're saying. We will have a discussion about that regarding bringing those things back. But I will not be doing that in isolation. No. I will be talking to the Chief Constable. And you will be aware at this moment in time we are recruiting for a new Chief Constable. So I will be waiting to talk to the new one, if I can put it that way.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
And just following on from Bobby's comment there, one of the issues that the panel has been trying to should we say, nailed down for about 3 or 4 years now, and I can see Simon, well, I can't see Simon actually, but I know Simon will be smiling, is the cost of demand. Dorset Police have a demand model, but we don't know how much it costs.
Thank you for that.
And once you know the cost of demand, you can then budget and you know these things better than any of us, quite honestly. Once you know how much something costs, you know what you can do and what you can't do. I'm going to end that conversation, because we will talk about that in the future years, no doubt. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a final, because this is an important part of this particular meeting. I'm going to do a final sweep through the panel just to see if there's any supplementary questions that have cropped up that people have not necessarily had a chance to ask. So I'm going to go through the same matrix as we've just gone through. I'm going to start with May. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
No, I haven't. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Tony?
No.
Thank you. Mark?
No, thanks.
Pete?
Nothing to add.
Dave Taylor?
Just coming back on again. Yeah, thank you for that. 2 questions I said I really want to ask separately. One of them is regarding the basically police patrolling of cars doing illegal acts, and also the other one was the fact of people coming into the county and not using the parking spaces with their travelling caravans and stuff, and keeping control of it, especially with the release of COVID, which we're going through for the holiday rush we're about to have. 2 questions there, which I really want to come outside of the box and talk to you honestly with regarding the people in the community pressing me accounts. Is that okay, David?
It is. Can you email them to me, David?
Yeah, I will do. I'll get them both to you over now.
Yeah, fine.
Thanks very much, Dave.
Thank you, Mike.
George?
None, Chair. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Les?
Nothing. Thank you, Chair.
Sherry?
Nothing, thank you, Chair, except a remark to my fellow councillors. The point that was made earlier about people putting things on social media and thinking in their head that that's the equivalent of reporting it to the police. For those of us who are councillors who are routinely monitoring social media, there's an important role for us there to just pick that up and just click in with a response. Have you reported this to the police? Or indeed report it ourselves, because there are very few people who are routinely monitoring local social media, and councils are among the few people who might be able to do that. It's just a thought.
Thanks, Sherry. Barry?
Yeah, just a quick one. Do we classify PCSOs as being frontline officers?
So I would classify them, as I said earlier, a lot of the time I didn't talk about frontline officers, I talked about neighbourhood and community policing. I would definitely classify them in that. From a point of view of frontline officers, no, I don't think they are actually. I need to double check that.
Okay, well, perhaps you come back to us on that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bobby?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thanks very much, Bobby. Thank you again, Dave, for taking all those questions and providing some good, robust answers, which will provide the panel with food for thought over the forthcoming years, no doubt, and no doubt may come back to haunt you in the future.
That's fine.
Thank you very much. I'm going to close item 4 down now, if everyone's happy, and move on to item 5, which is the road safety update. Thank you.
So item number 5 is the road safety update. Let me just get there. Okay, so what this does is this paper updates the members on road safety and casualty reduction activity within Dorset, as well as some of the related opportunities I'm going to be exploring during my term. So members requested this update on Dorset's activity to improve road safety, reduce the number of those killed or seriously injured on our roads. This activity is managed by Dorset Road Safe, which is our road safety partnership comprising of partners across policing, local authorities, health, transport, infrastructure and justice. So Dorset Road Safe is chaired by our Assistant Chief Constable, Sam Derea. And this strategic group meets twice a year and the tactical group of it meets monthly. So first of all, the headlines are positive. What the partnership's work has done is it's contributed to a decline in the number of people killed and seriously injured on our roads, as per paragraph 1.4. There's been a reduction from 408 in 2005 to 278 in 2020, a drop of almost 32%. All casualties, i.e. KSIs and slight injuries, have reduced from 3,566 in 2005 to 1,479 in 2020, which is a drop of 58%. But the DRS is ambitious for the future, and by 2030, it aims to reduce the number of people killed and seriously injured on the county's roads by a further 40%, compared to the 10-year 2010-2019 baseline. And DRS actually has a vision of 0 KSIs by 2050. So it's got an ambitious vision for the future. Strategy-wise, the partnership has this clear vision, and it sets out to aim to deliver safer people, safer vehicles, and safer roads. Excuse me. By focusing on 6 priority groups: pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists, younger and older road users, and those who use the roads for their work. Approach-wise, DRS uses the 4 E's of road safety: engagement, education, engineering, and enforcement, to provide an all-encompassing approach to improve safety, change driver behaviour, and reduce the number of road traffic casualties. Chair, an extensive but not exhaustive list is provided from the paragraph 3.3. And I'm not going to propose to dwell on it in detail, but simply say there's a good mix of activity from education and prevention through to enforcement. But I do want to highlight one activity in particular. Dorset is the only force in the country to produce an online driver awareness course offering, which in the past year has proven of significant benefit, as this has allowed drivers to continue to opt for education rather than receive their fines and/or points. An added benefit is that drivers can attend the course from anywhere in the country, which has proved a barrier in the past to visitors from out of the force area in which they receive their ticket. Members will note that over 19,000 online courses were delivered over the past 12 months. In terms of performance, Dorset's road safety continues to improve. The two key performance indicators are mapped over time and presented in figure 2, where they show a clear downwards trend. So I've also mentioned that the OPCC is a member of the Dorset Road Safe. We contributed to the existing strategy and support the various initiatives managed by both DRS and Dorset Police. Now, if we look forward and move on to opportunities, whilst we're assured by our level of activity across the partnership, and we particularly recognise the fantastic work of our community speedwatch groups, we of course recognise those areas where more might be done. And in fact, community speedwatch is an area that I talked about during the election, and in the same way as the neighbourhood watches, I want to strengthen and increase them. The success of our online driver awareness webinar has raised opportunities, both with our strategic alliance partner, Devon and Cornwall, and also internally as we explore other opportunities to exploit this platform further and reach more members of the public. There was a recent Association of Police and Crime Commissioners survey on road safety, and there was 66,266 respondees. And we found that 70% of the respondents either agreed or strongly agreed that fixed penalty notices for road traffic offences like speeding and failure to wear a seatbelt, which are currently £100, should be increased in line with other serious offences. Personally, and as the PCC, I totally agree with that and have lobbied to that effect upwards to government on this. Furthermore, 88% of respondents either agreed or strongly agreed that some of the money raised through fixed penalty notices should be reinvested into enforcement and road safety measures to deny criminals the use of the roads. Totally agree with that as well. In summary, Chair, road safety is a complex and demanding area that we'll continue to support to reduce the number of people injured on Dorset roads. It is something that I believe we are good at. It is something that when I consulted with the APCC road safety portfolio holder, Alison Hernandez, about, she agreed that Dorset road safety is something of a premier operation. So in summary, Chair, road safety is complex and demanding. We're going to continue to support it to reduce the number of people injured on Dorset roads. And I'd now be happy to hear any questions.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks for that sort of succinct overview of the report that your office has very kindly produced. I'm going to go through the matrix now. Tony, you'll get a chance in a sec. Barry.
Right, I should be there. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm actually a member of our local Speedwatch team in our ward, so I'm quite pushy on that. I also initiated a SID. I managed to get our local parish council to actually purchase a SID, and I'm one of the members who actually go round and move the SID from one post to another every 4 to 6 weeks. So I'm quite, I'm quite behind that. So yeah, I mean, really, I don't really have a question as such, but digital cameras, is there money in the budget to actually do this, to put more cameras up? That's one question. And the other thing is I noticed with the no excuse teams, there's a lot of Dorset has quite a few unmarked vehicles and police cars. And if you catch somebody for speeding, invariably when the officers checks, the car's not got any insurance. And invariably they find that there's drugs in the car as well. So, unmarked police cars, to my mind, are I quite promote. Anyway, I don't know what your thoughts are on those.
Okay, so if I take the last one first, the one about unmarked police cars, I'm not really going to talk about whether we're going to have unmarked police cars or marked police cars, because I think that's an operational one. I'll leave that one for the Chief Constable. What I will say, though, is I'm very committed to supporting the Chief in order to address that specific issue that you're talking about. Yeah, sometimes I hear criticism about the only thing you're interested in is a bit of speeding. Can't you do something about real crime? You've actually gone to the nub of it, Barry, with what you've just said. When the traffic police are stopping these vehicles, they're finding that actually some of these vehicles are exactly that. They are uninsured, un-MOT'd, untaxed, and being used for nefarious purposes. And actually something I have spoken to the Chief about is the increased use of ANPR in the future in order to try and unpick the criminality which is going on. So that I'm very supportive of. You asked specifically about the number of digital cameras in Dorset and whether we could increase them. That's clearly a partnership issue between the police and the local authority. I recognise that there was a recent upgrade to the digital cameras, which cost around about 1.35 million, and that was funded entirely by Dorset Police. So we understand that Dorset Police is currently exploring arrangements with Highways England and local partners about increasing the capacity. But the backstop position, which means we rely on police funding, is largely unsustainable. Because if we're going to put those cameras up, that means I'm not paying for police officers. And therefore, Chair, we are reliant on partner support. So that's where we are with that one, Barry. Does that help?
Yeah, that's good. And you know, it's a matter of whether you put the money in the cameras or you have unmarked police cars. And probably from my view, I would prefer to have the unmarked police cars, because that then leads to the police finding other crimes as well.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Les?
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this report. I really find it very interesting and worthwhile the reading. David, for your information, I actually wrote the Community Speed Watch plan before the previous crime commissioner took it on and adopted it. I wrote it and had trialled it in several areas, so really behind that one as well. Two questions, if I may, please, and you may not be able to answer them at this time. What are your plans to engage with car enthusiasts? Many of these are young people with loud exhaust, fast cars, modified car systems. They set up backfiring systems. There's an opportunity for engagement there, because these are the lads and girls that are going to be driving around the roads. And my second question is, speed cameras impact on driver behaviour. Many slow down as they go past the camera and then speed up afterwards. How can we change that? And what are the opportunities for doing speed monitoring in less traffic areas where perhaps it doesn't justify what the cameras being deployed, if you get what I mean from that, Commissioner?
Thanks, Les. I do get what you mean by that. The first one about engagement with the hot rod fraternity, for want of a better phrase. Yes, that's something I'm really interested in looking at. It's something we've discussed. It's part of the overall piece around, if you like, my reduction of ASB. Because for some residents, the noise, the donuts, etc., is for them ASB. And you're right. The first part of the game is to talk to the young people who are doing it. That's something which we're going to look at as part of the police and crime plan, so I won't give you a direct answer on what we're doing about that now. The second one is an interesting one, because the obvious way to do it is to have average speed cameras, and then you don't have that situation to the same extent, but obviously they are much more expensive. So again, I'm going to swivel on that one. We're going to have a look at it and think about that, and talk to our partners, because that's got to be a partnership thing.
Thanks, Commissioner. And just going back to my first point about the car enthusiasts, the Dorset Police once had a 50-50 car, and they took that around to appropriate groups of young people to show them what a legal car and an illegal car. And I just wonder whether there's an opportunity to have a suitably modified car enthusiast car that officers suitably trained could take to meets that would get the young people swarming all over, and an opportunity for engagement there with them. I'll leave that one with you. Thank you.
You can. It sounds like a tractor.
Funny that.
Funny that.
Done that one.
Yeah, done that one. Thanks, Les.
Simon, you've got a point.
Thank you, Chair. So just to highlight to members and members of the community watching, so Dorset Police has in recent months partnered with a YouTuber. So a young member of the community whose name is George. I think he goes by George's Car Media on YouTube. And there's been a number of posts that Dorset Police has made in conjunction with him about car modifications, illegal license plates, exhaust. I'm afraid I'm not an area of expertise on my side, but there is a number of educational videos online that Dorset Police has partnered with a car YouTuber on to address exactly the issues that you've raised, Councillor Fry. Happy to provide that link.
Thank you, Simon. That would be really useful to see those links and perhaps to promote them. But I'm aware of a number of small groups that go around that may or may not be aware of those links. And I think first-hand experience sometimes talking cars, as we used to have with the motorbikes and people like that. But thank you for that update. It's really useful. Thank you, Commissioner, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon, as well. Sherry.
Yes, thank you very much. You said just a moment ago, Dave, that some people say, why are you worrying about speeding? Why don't you do real crime? In the communities that I represent, and that's over the years been more than 20 villages, speeding is real crime. It's by far the most significant, numerically significant issue in my inbox, and has been for many years. It really, really matters to people's lives. I have introduced speed watches in most of my villages, and but I think that it would be fair to say that here in Dorset we had a flurry of speed watches and a great deal of enthusiasm for speed watch a few years ago. And over recent years, before the pandemic, of course, which was different, but in the few years running up to that, many of my speed watch teams were slightly losing heart. And because it started off, they were very enthusiastic and they got a lot of support from the police, and the police contact was always there and was always interested, and that has waned slightly. Now, I appreciate that, you know, there's always something else that resources could be done, but, you know, Speedwatch and SIDS is just about the only crime prevention facility that's in many of our villages that's there all the time. And we shouldn't underestimate, it's a community run initiative. People in the community do it for themselves. And so if I could put in a plea that we could get back to the formal level of support for the Speedwatch initiatives that we had some years ago, that would perhaps put the energy back into it. I know that I have invited you to come and meet a lot of my parishes in September, the Speedwatch chiefs, and they're very much looking forward to talking to you about how Speedwatch works and how it doesn't work for them. So yeah, if I could ask, could we have a little bit more energy back into the Speedwatch initiatives, please?
Sherry, thank you for that. I obviously wasn't clear enough. That is what people had said to me. It is not my position. My position has been very clear, both in the election and also it's part of the police and crime plan, is I want to strengthen and encourage more Speedwatch initiatives. And part of it is to have better connectivity. Yeah. And that's exactly what you're talking about. It's this same old chestnut which keeps coming up, and it doesn't matter what community it is, it's better connectivity with the police. Mm. So the simple answer is yes, I'm all over that. I will be coming up to see you and Jane later in, I think it's September. Yes. And I'll make absolutely certain that I stress that to the people there as well. And we'll be very close to producing the plan by then, so you should see something as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sherry. Thanks, Dave. Moving on, Mark. Mark Howell.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I don't have anything. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Appreciate that. And Pete Barrett.
Will be considered.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of observations and one question. I've spent 39 years in the fire service, so I've spent an awful lot of time extricating casualties from vehicles, and anything that can be done to reduce the level of injury and harm that's caused by those sort of events is to be welcomed.
A petition from the stand group requesting.
Jonathan Mayer seems to be joining us.
Brilliant.
And so to keep going, following on from Les's comment, we had a recent incident at the Park and Ride in Weymouth by the so-called car enthusiasts. My residents were not referring to them as car enthusiasts after that event. Some videos were put up on Facebook by the organisers, who then claimed to have nothing to do with the event whatsoever. But it was quite clear they had a site on Facebook. They put up the videos. They'd actually organised the event by advertising it to their group. Is there nothing the police can do to follow up that? Because it's obviously a link to the people that organised it, and what they did was fairly shocking, to be honest. Caused a lot of damage, caused a lot of upset to residents, and actually ended up with one person in hospital as well. So
Peter, you're asking me You're asking me about an operational thing there. I'm happy to ask the question of the force as to what they can do in that area. The area of rolling up organisers afterwards. I'm very happy to ask that question for you, but I'll do it outside the meeting.
Okay, yeah, I completely understand that point.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. David.
Yes, thank you. The knocking has stopped at long last. Just to let you know that we're a bit quieter here. My principal question, as I've raised this before, regarding specifically on police and crime panels, and specifically the fact is I am a member of the Foster Selection Committee for Dorset, and I also look after some interest with adult services and vulnerable children. And the fact of linking in with us as a police panel of make sure we engage with foster care services to actually help with vulnerable children that are engaged in cross boundaries and drugs related offences. Now, where are we in relation to a conversation with foster services and adult services regarding how we can help? It's a bit of a sidewinder, I know, David. It's just that one of the things I did raise last time, and I've raised it several times before.
Yeah, thanks for that, David. That's a good question, actually. Would you mind taking that offline with Dave? Because
absolutely, it's a big one. It's a real big one, but it means that Dave should be fully aware of this.
It's a bit of a
I can give a little bit in so much as I've spoken to Theresa Levy.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to, in fact, I'm seeing him again tomorrow night, actually, Andrew Parry.
Yes.
Yes, we've started conversations.
Fantastic.
But if you have a specific question, David, I'm very happy to take that offline.
It's the fact of engaging, the fact of where people can go to actually make sure the police are actually involved in helping the services to actually get a way going forward of protecting the vulnerable children.
Yeah, well, I absolutely see that this is part of the early intervention process and the joined up approach.
Thank you for the question.
George.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And if I may, I'd like to do two questions. One will lead into the other, depending on what the answer is. If I could refer the Commissioner to the public pack, page 15. It relates to the graph. I'm a great believer in a picture paints 1,000 words. So that graph there actually is for Dorset road safety. Key performance or long-term key performance indicators, which is the measured on slight injuries and killed or serious injuries. When looking at that graph there, then we can see over the last 20 years or so, there's been a steady decline on the slight injuries. But to my eye, it seems that the killed and serious injuries hasn't exactly plateaued, but essentially is running along at less of a decline, a steady incremental decline as the slight injuries is. I'd just like the view from the Commissioner as regards how we can accelerate the killed and serious injuries so that they drop below the slight injuries.
That's a very good question, George. I mean, I think probably if you drew a line through the killed or serious injuries, it would still be reducing. I guess the question for me is a different one, is what happened between 2011 and 2015? Because there it suddenly seemed to go up, if you look at the graph, compared to the graph below. So I'd like to understand why that happened, because that might inform how we can get it to go down further, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And the answer to your question is I'd have to come back to you, but I'd like to understand that piece first, because that's where it fundamentally changed for me.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. My next question actually may not be actually related to that, but it's an important one, particularly when we talk about slight and serious injuries and even being killed. We see that this current government has one of the advantages of COVID is related to active travel. So we see in, for instance, the National Planning Policy Framework, which actually dictates how houses and community properties are built, is that it's now a requirement to have bike storage in there. We saw the active travel plan initiative during the height of COVID to encourage people to be more active, which included on their bicycles. So people taking advantage of the quieter roads to actually cycle to school where they were available to do that for key workers, and to actually go out for family trips and so on and so forth. Children cycling to school, to me, is a very key way to actually get whole families more involved in an active travel philosophy, and move away from perhaps what is known traditionally as the school run, because obviously more vehicles on the road increases the chance of injury. My question essentially is around social media. We come back to social media. What I've seen, and there is a political influence in this as well, is a hostility by, let's say, a car community or a driver community towards cyclists. And we see that in a number of areas as regards cycle lanes, etc., being put in. What, as you as a commissioner, are you firstly aware of this hostility that's on social media between the driving community, or small elements of the driving community, and cyclists? And secondly, do you have a concern that this hostility and this attitude actually puts cyclists at risk, and what would you plan to do about it?
Right, that's a very good question, George. It's one that I'm going to answer in this way, because I've seen other road users, cyclists, having degrees of hostility towards car users. So I think I'm not going to police social media. I don't think that's my job. What I will say is, if any group actually started targeting physically the other group, then I would expect the police to address it. So if it becomes more than nastiness on social media, then I would expect the police to address it. And I think that's the fairest way I can say about it. I'm not going to step into a political view as to whether you should have a cycle or a car. I think that's down to the individual.
Thank you, Chair. No follow-up question.
Thanks, George. Tony.
Yeah, I've got a few points. First of all, I would totally go along with the statement right at the beginning that we should have unmarked cars. I think they're particularly useful in spotting what is often quite obvious drug dealing going on, particularly on our estates and adjacent to open spaces where people can escape in multiple directions. On the subject of average speed cameras, I did notice in Cornwall, and it comes as a bit of a sort of a wake-up call when you're driving along and a thing flashes up and gives you your registration number and tells you what the average speed is you've been doing, which in my case was 27 miles an hour, so that was perfectly reasonable. But there's quite an effective area of that between Helston and Penzance, and it seems quite sophisticated. But what it does do, if it identifies the number plate, it would be very useful to identify, as part of what it's doing, if it's properly linked, untaxed, unlicensed, uninsured vehicles, because all of that information is available electronically. So I kind of hope that could be looked at, albeit it might be expensive. I was a bit concerned that in recent years, I think between 2015 and 2019, when I wasn't around to have an influence on it, one of the speed cameras in my ward did actually get removed with no explanation, despite the fact that quite a lot of development had gone on immediately adjacent to that. And I was rather surprised to see speed cameras removed. And there's another one just coming out of Bournemouth through Bear Wood that's been covered up for probably about 10 years now. So that might be worth looking at. You know, are they still needed? If they're still needed, if they're, if the speeds measure high, then perhaps their reinstatement or correct installation might be worth considering. One of the areas that you mention in the report, which but not highly, is drug driving. I'm convinced from some of the people that I encounter regularly motoring, and particularly the person behind you when you're driving quite legally that's twitching and very agitated, that drug driving is actually more rife than we give credit for. And I wonder whether there will be a little bit more focusing on that if people are acting in a way which they do tend to act if they're under the influence of drugs, that is actually picked up more easily. The only other comment is on exhausts. I'm rather surprised at some of the noisy exhausts, and I have one in my locality that sounds like a thunderstorm when it starts off, but I'm surprised that they're MOT legal. And I would have thought that if there was a noisy exhaust, and thinking of cars like Subarus and so on, that how on earth do they get through the MOT? Because I thought silencers are part of the MOT thing, part of the exhaust system, and I would have thought it was an MOT worthy thing. So I know that's covering a lot of areas, but those are my questions.
Tony, thank you. And so let me try and answer all of them. So the undercover cars, look, operationally, I am certain that we use lots of undercover cars for all sorts of things. And I would have thought that drug dealing and rolling up drug dealers is one of them. I'm not gonna, I wouldn't have the detail, and I absolutely wouldn't want the detail, because that's very much the chief and the police's domain. ANPR, so it's not quite ANPR what you're talking about on that road between Helston and Penzance. I'll ask Miss Hernandez what her cameras are like, and try and understand it. What I do know is, having had discussions with the chief, is that ANPR, so the ability to actually find these cars which are in effect being driven by the bad guys, is something which we're looking at. So when we do change cameras, we're looking at making certain they have an ANPR capability as well. One of the disadvantages of having this meeting at this time is I'm not telling you the whole plan. When I talked about what my road safety priorities were, top of the list was drug driving. I've sat in a pub with two ladies basically in tears because they live in a road with a drug dealer in, and basically they are worried for the primary school at the end of the road because his clientele basically spaced out, get in their cars and drug drive all the time. So it is something I care about. It is the top of my agenda as to what are we going to do about drug driving, because I think that's something which scares me a lot. And the last one is a really interesting one. You talked about noisy exhausts. For some residents in Dorset, that is their primary issue. It is motorbikes, particularly, with noisy exhausts. And I understand that in other places, they are trialing noise emission monitoring systems. So that if the decibels are out of whack with what they should be, a picture is taken of the said vehicle and the police can follow up. That's something I'm interested in understanding more about and hopefully bringing it to Dorset. So that was a very fast response, but I hope it was useful to you, Tony.
Yeah, it was. But the noisy exhaust, I would have thought that would have been an MOT thing, that if a car goes in for an MOT and you start the car and it throbs like a thunderstorm, I would have thought that would have been something that would have got picked up at the MOT and sort of dealt with. But, maybe I don't know my MOT rules in great detail.
No, it may well have done, but there are also individuals who like taking their bits of exhaust off, which make them quieter to make them noisier, unfortunately.
Thanks for that, chaps. Useful information, useful conversation. There are some hands up. I'll come to you, Mark, Les, in a sec. I'm just going to run through the chart first. May?
Thank you very much, Chair. So it's in a way, it's quite nice to hear that around the table, the issues that I have within my ward, within the BCP area, are echoed elsewhere in Dorset, particularly speeding, car enthusiasts, and I think that part of it could have been increased because of COVID and lockdown, and we are seeing on social media car meets being publicized, and I think that is actually encouraging more of these people that own performance cars to actually go there and show what they can do, knowing full well that actually they shouldn't be speeding down residential roads. I think my question, I've got two questions. The first one, Commissioner, you talked about e-scooters. I get a lot of complaints about e-scooters, and I think there is still this misunderstanding between what can legally be used and what cannot be used, because we have a hire scheme here in BCP, so that can be legally used, but not any other e-scooters. So I know the police have run a campaign, but that I still see a lot of private e-scooters being used, not just being used, but being used at quite a great speed, which could cause serious injury if there was a collision. And the other question I'll ask very quickly is, very interesting to listen to the discussion about using patrol cars, unmarked cars versus speed cameras. I think what would be actually quite interesting to see would be in the future what impact they have. And the reason I'm saying this is because if you have somewhere that has no speed cameras and you send either a patrol car or an unmarked car, it could just be the case that word gets around on social media, well, they are monitoring traffic there, so therefore be careful when you go down road XYZ. And then when they're not there, well, it's business as usual and they go happily speeding along it. Whereas with a speed camera, it's constantly there. So I think it'd be quite interesting to see what impact these different approaches have in terms of being able to tackle the speeding issue. Thank you.
Okay, May, thank you for that. If I can just talk to the e-scooter piece, that's something that I spoke to the force about almost on the first day. And they went and checked whether it was an issue that they were being cited on, and they decided it was. So since then, we've been having days of action. What you said actually is absolutely the nub of it, is that people don't understand what the issue is. So I've tried to raise awareness about that, and I'll be doing more on it. We've got another day of action coming soon, this week. But one of the issues is also the issue around the Beryl bikes. And I don't know if you want to take this back as community safety portfolio holder. But one of the issues is that those bikes are being used in ways that they shouldn't be by some people. So, for example, I have had residents contact me about the Beryl bikes, saying that they have seen young kids on them. You're not meant to be able to use them unless you're 16. And I understand that a provisional license is required. You're not meant to use them if you're 2 up. And I've seen that myself, that you know, they're double ridden. And you're certainly not allowed to use them and scoot along the pavement, which is something which gets done a lot. Now, all those behaviours with the Beryl bikes can be reported to Beryl, but you have to go online and tap it in and all the rest of it. So I'm not certain whether the reporting follows the amount of incidents and whether people actually know that you can report back to Beryl bikes. And certainly that's something I would encourage, because otherwise it's, you know, the pilot scheme isn't a true pilot. We have to understand where it's not working as well as where it is working. So that's the Beryl bike approach from my point of view. Regarding the proliferation of, if you like, scooters, electric scooters, you are allowed to use them so long as it's on private land. So they are illegal on the road, illegal on the pavement, illegal on most places where they're currently being used, which is why I asked the police to look at it from a community concern and why we're having days of action. The issue is really around the insurance, because you're not insured. They are effectively treated as motorized vehicles. Therefore, you should have insurance for them. I'm somewhat disappointed that, unlike the rental scheme in London, we don't have registration numbers even on the Beryl bikes. I think that would be useful going forward, not only from the point of view of victims who get knocked over, at least you know who did it to you, but also if they are used for criminality. So that's my take on e-scooters. We're going to keep on doing days of action. I see them as a transformative mode of transport, but legislation at this moment in time hasn't caught up with them. That's where I am with it.
Thanks, May. Bobby, I'm going to get you to sweep up at the end, if that's okay. I'm just going to ask Mark, you've got a question?
Just on that last point, and I think generally people do know they're not supposed to be using these bikes, but the scooters. I think you were a bit confused there because you kept referring to Beryl bikes when I think you meant the Beryl scooters.
Forgive me. Yes, I did mean the scooters.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, the only thing that's going to stop them, if actually the intention is to stop them, is confiscation, which I understand that some police authorities are actually doing. But the question I wanted to raise was in an earlier response, I noticed you were very equivocal about when trying to address the balance between motorists and cyclists, and being very diplomatic in your approach to that. But actually, you know, government policy is that cyclists should be treated beneath pedestrians, but before drivers, in terms of promoting, you know, to promote health. It's in the council policies. You know, it's also to aid congestion. We need to encourage cycling. One of the issues that we have is that cyclists are encouraged by cycling organisations, I think rightly, to cycle, take the primary or secondary position on the road, which is either in the centre of a carriageway or between the edge and the centre when it's appropriate, to avoid being pushed into the curb, because that's the place that people are most likely to get injured. And we have very high, in BCP area anyway, very high cycling injuries. Yeah, if you adopt one of those positions, and just so that people watching know, the advantage of adopting the centre of the lane is that it forces the car behind you to wait until there is actually proper room to pass. That means they can move into the adjacent carriageway to overtake, rather than squeezing through a space which does not leave the 1.5 meters between the car and the cycle that is necessary. And what we get a lot is that cyclists adopting that position get angry drivers behind them, and those drivers then try and pass, and they don't give 1.5 meters, and they cut up the cyclist. And we need some education in this area, so to tell the public, you know, that it is perfectly okay for cyclists, and indeed a good thing for cyclists, to be adopting these, you know, more protective positions on the road. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Les.
Yeah, thanks for that, Commissioner. Just very quickly, Dorset Police used to have one of the sound monitoring devices a few years ago. Whether they've still got it, whether it's been used, where it is, I have no idea.
No, it's not. I haven't been able to unpick that. I've only heard of their use elsewhere, Les.
We did, certainly in my time, we did have them, and we were able to roll them out when needed. West Bay and Bridport was a problem, and it's certainly deployed there and in Dorchester. So where they are now, I don't know.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Les. George?
Just like occurs to me, because we've got the fatal 5 in the report, and the first one of that is speed, excessive speed. I think we've got a missed opportunity, and I've heard others sort of promote issues that they have within their own ward. I'd like to sort of just briefly run through the opportunity which I think is being missed. In my own ward, I've got a VAS camera, which is a vehicle activated sign. So you come up along the sign, it's actually on the overcliff. So it's a cut through from, should I say, it's one of the preferred main routes from Christchurch to Poole and back again. The VAS sign itself comes up and says it's 30 here. On a drive out to Poole yesterday on a little bit of business, I came back and it actually flashed up your speed. Which actually, from a driver's perspective, encouraged me more. I go, oh, 27, good going me, little pat on the back. The VAS camera of the nature which we had, and you talked about budget and that are more expensive, that just flashes up 30 is routinely ignored. I can stand there 10 minutes at any point during any one day, and I'll routinely have this camera going off. The opportunity which is being missed here, and I hope that you take it up, is that there is the opportunity for these VAS cameras to actually collect the data, and actually say the number of times that they're actually triggered. There's also VAS cameras which can actually take number plates, etc. In line with the community speed watch scheme, which I'm a great fan of, is there not an opportunity here to gather this data, particularly if it was with a number plate recognition system, and send out, as with the community warning, the community speed watch scheme, an email, a letter to the registered holder to say, hey, we've seen you go through this sign 3 times, in excess speed, So my plea to you, if we're considering budget for cameras, that there is a missed opportunity with these vehicle activated signs to actually capture the number plate and actually identify persistent offenders, shall we say, that are actually routinely ignoring the posted speed limit. So that would be my plea to you. And my question then is, would you be prepared to take that up? And I see you scribbling away.
A, I'm scribbling away. B, George, I like it, actually. If it can be done, I'll look into that.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, George. Bobby?
Thank you, Commissioner. It seems like today you're really speaking Bobby's language, aren't you? And for a long time, I'm really excited about the next few years ahead. We're putting all these plans in places and it looks like we could really make a difference. For those who don't know, I was on traffic and this was my bread and butter stuff. I did this day in, day out. The reason that we got that spike after 2010 is because we used to have the road casualty reduction 2010 targets, which was to reduce all the numbers by 40%. We managed that, we achieved it nationally. But of course, we took our foot off the pedal, started to creep up. 2015, we saw that sign, and so we're trying again. But because it's not national, we don't have any concerted efforts to really, really hammer this home. And equally, we've got online and other priorities that are coming through. So it's become a real dichotomy as to which way to push that. But there were some really, really good things that came out of RCR 2010, and I'm sure we can put them back in place. I think we need to. Section 59, really, really sexy piece of legislation, really helps with ASB. I'd really like, however, to talk about Section 59 when you talk to us about ASB rather than under KSI, if that's okay, because it's a really powerful piece of toolkit and we should use it more. And we should give officers the confidence to use it more.
I'm very happy with that. I like S59. There's a number of places I can see it being used.
Absolutely. And of course, it's the vehicle that is also Section 59 as well as the driver. So
exactly,
it's a win-win. So I'd like to make it more relevant to your role. Would you mind please scrutinising the Chief Constable to start using that and empowering his officers to do so, please?
Ahead of you.
Thank you. Crime fighters, absolutely. Traffic, whilst you police officers don't like it, this is how, using traffic, we can get those criminals off the road, criminality, burglaries. They all travel by that, and ANPR is a really powerful tool to do that. So I would really support any funding that you can provide, any support that you can provide to the constabulary to achieve that. Fantastic. Anyone who knows, and obviously Peter Barrow will know, that being involved in a fatal is devastating to everyone, whether you are the offending driver or whether you are the relatives of the deceased. It ruins lives. It is catastrophic. So for anyone who says, why aren't you out killing, oh, sorry, why aren't you out prosecuting real criminals? Speed kills.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is absolutely, completely and utterly devastating. And if we can keep getting those fatal 5 messages out there with your support, I'd really, really appreciate that. It does, however, bring us to convictions, and it's a really long, arduous journey to get into courts. And those families are absolutely pinning all their hopes on convictions. So I don't know what we can do that you can put into place to support officers to do that, given the bureaucracy involved. I'm happy to talk to you offline about how incredibly difficult it's got with Wessex CPS at the moment. It just ludicrous, but we're letting people down. And when we talk about victims, it's them at the end of it that we're letting down. But it does then bring us onto that working and that partnership. There was a point in a question in all of this, I'm sorry, about housekeeping and engineering. And engineering really falls to the local authorities. That's where you really, really need to come to us and put the pressure. And when we have things, for example, climate declarations, so we let Burgess grow, we're not got maintenance on hedgerows, we're foliage cover of signs, of junctions, etc. That's where we're going to start to get our fatals. That's where people aren't going to see vehicles coming. It's where people aren't going to see the motorcyclists.
You're right.
So I'd really, really like for you to apply some pressure, please, on local authorities to tidy up our roads, make sure the street signs are there, make sure they're clean, etc., etc. If that's okay, please. And also then my last request is, sorry, exhaust. They have BSF kite marks. That's all your officers have to look at. Does it have a kite mark on the exhaust? If it doesn't, it's not legal. Let's impound the vehicle. You don't need fancy measuring equipment. As a statutory consultee, I'd really like us, the OPC, to feed back on the trial on electric scooters, please. It's a trial. We're looking for feedback, and I think the OPC's response and understanding of that would be really helpful. Please.
Yeah, I was planning on doing that when it's required.
Brilliant, thank you. And then my last request then, again, to the action plan, is I'd like very much really to, I know you've got your 2030 measures, but perhaps an update report in September 2023. That gives us 3 summers, because the fatals depends on so many variances, particularly hot summers, rainy days when the clocks go back,
Sure.
etc. I think that September 23 gives us some good data post-COVID, everyone out on roads, staycations, increased traffic, for us to really understand what's happening on our roads and look to see how we can support you in scrutinising the Chief Constable and also keeping all of our visitors residents safe. Thank you. Sorry, there's a lot there, but important.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thank you.
Thank you, David, for fronting up that item on road safety. A lot of interesting topics raised there, shall we say. Moving on to item 6, which is the Police and Crime Plan Quarterly Monitoring Report. I think it's worth highlighting for anybody who's watching this. This will be a review of the current plan, which was the plan of the previous Police and Crime Commissioner. So the OPCC is literally in the process of changing horses at the moment. So therefore, this is a look back on the last quarter as far as the quarterly the plan is concerned for the previous regime. So could I hand that over to you, please, David?
It's not me for this one. It's Simon.
Yeah, I know it's Simon, but your team can. If you've got a nomination, then it'll be Simon. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Commissioner. So, Chair, as you've highlighted, the following 2 items relate to activity undertaken under the previous administration, and I'm very happy to present them for member scrutiny this time, albeit I won't go into as much detail as the previous Commissioner did previously. Before I started, I just wanted to quickly address the use of statistics within the report, particularly for the benefit of new members and for those members of the public who may be watching online, and particularly to explain why, in some cases, an increase in crime can be considered helpful, as it recognises better confidence in reporting. So, Chair, members will know that there are a couple of crime types around underreported crime and preventative crime, which policing as an institution is actively trying to increase awareness of and increase reporting of. So in relation to underreported crime, these are things like sexual offences, domestic abuse, hate crime. Policing recognises that the level of reporting of these offences is significantly underreported, and therefore any increase in reporting is not necessarily seen as an increase in crime, but an increase in reporting. And that is quite important because that's about the victim confidence to actually address some of those issues with police forces. And that's seen as a good sign. So what you'll see in relation to an increase, for example, in sexual offences or domestic abuse, it's not to say that an increase is positive, but an increase in reporting is deemed positive. And likewise, there's also other crime types which are badged as preventative crime more broadly. So these are things like theft and handling, fraud, drug dealing. And again, these are traditionally underreported crimes, and an increase in reporting is seen as a good indicator of positive police activity. So if there is an increase in theft and handling, that's more than likely down to good reporting and good activity by policing in uncovering those issues. So likewise, drug dealing, likewise, fraud. There's a recognition that these types of crime are underreported and an increase in reporting is positive. So hopefully, Chair, that gives a bit of background as to why some of those stats are green when members of the public might expect them to be shown as red. Chair, members will note that the OPCC was successful in delivering the well over 100 individual commitments from the previous Commissioner's Policing Crime Plan, the details of which were published in the Delivering the Commitments report. From my perspective, I don't get many opportunities to publicly thank OPCC colleagues for their tireless efforts, but I will do so here, Chair, if you'll forgive me, particularly in the context of the last year and the extension to the PCC term. There were many significant challenges that the team met, and they met them in their usual unruffled and professional manner. So on behalf of myself and Julie and Adam, would like to say thank you to the OPCC team. Chair, rather than go through the many things that were accomplished, I thought it might be useful to just quickly mention the things that are still outstanding. So under the working with our communities pillar, whilst OPCC worked really hard and continues to work really hard with both the force and with our partners to reduce disproportionality, it's clear this is going to be a long-term aim, and unfortunately we are still in the realm of not necessarily having the impact we would have liked to have. So Mr. Sidgwick has already highlighted how he's going to take up the mantle of challenging the force in this, and he's already explained that he's going to be receiving a briefing from the force on this very shortly. So you can rest assured that we will continue to address this particular issue. Under the supporting victims and witnesses pillar, similarly, OPCC continues to work hard to improve the service of victims around rape and serious sexual offences. And whilst improvements have been made, nationally it should be recognised that policing is nowhere near where it needs to be with regards to victims having the confidence to report and to progress their case through the courts process. So we recognise that although we have made significant improvements, that is still shown as an area that we still need to make improvement on. And Dorset is a better performer than other forces, but still policing as a whole needs to improve its service in this area. On the next pillar, so members will be concerned, sorry, it's the same pillar even, on the same pillar, members will also recognise that there were some concerns with the Transforming Rehabilitation Programme and the impact this has had on the ability of local agencies to affect the local rehabilitation of offenders. Chair, you probably know, members will probably know that probation services have now been returned to public control, and the early signs of this are positive. there's already been some national movement on the community payback scheme, which hopefully will be under local ownership. And we've also had some movement on the ability of forces to increase the level of electronic monitoring of offenders. So this is GPS tags, of which Dorset has been advocating for quite some time. So very hopeful in that space. Early days, but hopefully the opportunities to actually develop in that area are now being returned back to local control. And then finally, just on the final pillar, transforming for the future, just wanted to highlight that although Dorset Police is still on a journey towards being more sustainable and has taken a number of steps to reduce its carbon footprint for a variety of reasons in the last year, particularly the pandemic for obvious reasons, there is still much more work to do. So, Chair, hopefully that's a quick whistle-stop overview of activity of OPCC during the previous year.
Yeah.
Happy to take any questions, comments.
Thanks very much, Simon, as always. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask the leagues if they've got any points they want to ask, and then go through the whole panel on the matrix as I'll get there in a minute, as is in your brief. Thank you. So looking at pillar 1, Pete.
Thank you, Chair. I have to freely admit, due to the COVID restrictions and the fact I haven't been on the panel for that long, I haven't made any progress I might have liked to on this.
Yeah, no worries.
So there's nothing really constructive to say, and I look forward to actually working with the new PCC on his priorities-based approach.
Thank you. Pillar 2, Les, David?
No, nothing. Thank you, Chair. Simon, thank you for a very full update on that period. I have nothing to add at this time due to the situation. It's unfair to ask questions on that, but thank you.
David?
And thank you. Yeah, I've addressed something with you, David, which is close to my heart. And of course, I will be sending questions to you regarding going research in detail on that, which is quite important for me and community. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And Pillar 3, May.
Thank you, Chair. It's just more a comment than it wouldn't be fair to ask the Commissioner to respond, but under Pillar 3, note that CRC is still showing red, and also Simon has actually touched on why some of the services have actually been delayed. So I'm referring to Committee 107. Thank you.
Yes, I can provide a bit more information if that's helpful, Chair.
Yep.
So, so just to add a bit more information with regards to so 107 for members who might not have the immediate in front of them is improve the service offers to victims of rape and serious sexual assault. So RASO by police terminology. Chair, it's recognised that nationally policing needs to get better at this. So the Justice Secretary Robert Buckland apologised to rape victims in the last couple of weeks for the low conviction rates, and nationally that rate is about 3.5% over the last year. The rate in Dorset Police is better at 5.5%, but that's still inadequate. Let's be honest. But so as I said, Dorset Police is better than the national average, but still lots more work needs to be done in that case.
Thanks very much for that, Simon. Would it be unkind, David, to see if you've got some sort of vision in that area as how you see this to be improved, this particular area?
It's not. I can't give you any hard detail at this time. It's too early. I can give you my direction of travel. I've been to see STARS and You First around this area already. It's an area I care about significantly because of its link not just to a lot of the rapes which I'm seeing come across my desk on an operational basis are linked to domestic abuse. So the whole thing is sort of linked together. I'm looking at it from the victim's end. I'm trying to unpick where the issues are in the court pathway, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
As to where this lack of confidence comes from.
Yeah.
I'm also looking at, in a wider context, I'm looking at understanding training, the training of the police and how that works, particularly in this context. So we've got, for example, recently we've started a new initiative which is training the police on domestic abuse issues. And there's other things that we're looking at. For example, do we need, and I think we're going to start piloting it, do we need a domestic abuse car at weekends with somebody who takes witness statements in a slightly different way to that which we are currently doing, which would allow police officers to move on to the next call, if that makes sense. There's a number of initiatives, a number of things that we're looking at, but the detail will come in the plan, if that makes sense.
And it also links into your expression, crime fighters. It's not just a case of, dare I say, nabbing somebody. It's providing sufficient evidence to get a conviction. That's
Correct.
the thing.
Correct. Absolutely.
Dave.
Yeah, just to say basically the importance of STARS, etc. You know, the fact of joining the communities up, to be actively involved with them for the information and help and guidance, because a lot of them feel as though they're on their own sometimes, because the fact is they're trying to do the work as in a volunteer basis, but question of connecting up police, public and local authority to say they are there to help and we are there to help them is the big answer, because they sometimes feel as though it's not there. And I know, because I'm part of STARS, so I understand where they're coming from. But I mean, the fact is that it is a big thing, and it's one thing we've had hidden away from our communities and our environment and should stop. And that's why we should go forward with this big time. Again, it's a sidewinder. Sorry, David, you're new to this all, but it has been a big issue, huge across Dorset for the last 20 years, at least not more.
But Dave, you're talking my language, because the key to fixing all these problems is about linking everybody up. The local authority, the police, the public, and basically that's the way that you get, if you like, behavioural change, society change. That's the only way you get it.
Perfect.
So absolutely, no, I agree with you. That's why I'm very happy our office has funded STARS, a proportion of it for in a 7-year contract, funnily enough.
Yes.
So I'm very happy about that. We've also, as we said earlier in the 100 days plan, you know, one of the first things I've done is I've basically funded a stalking advisor for You First. So we're all over this area. There'll be more coming forward in the plan.
That's good news, because as Mayor of Dorchester, and along with Molly Rennie, we were key making sure that this did really happen to Dorset and to other areas, to cross borders as well, because this is not just pertaining to Dorset, it's a national issue as well, which is pretty bad.
It is, you're absolutely right. And something I haven't mentioned earlier is I am sitting down with all of the different PCCs around our borders to talk about making certain our cross-border working is up to snuff. I don't want any fading at the fringe.
Fantastic. Outstanding, David. Thank you. Thank you.
May, still your pillar?
Yeah, just very quickly. I meant to ask this earlier, but Commissioner's mentioned about the initiative for having an advocacy person for stalking, and I'm just wondering whether that would also include digital stalking. So, for want of a better word, people that troll others. And I guess you would call that possibly cyberbullying, because it is a form of stalking in my mind. But I actually welcome the discussion we've just had regarding rape victims, because I think it's very, very important that they feel that actually they are being listened to and that their situation is being taken seriously, because I think that that's where it can sometimes fall apart, is when the victims, they are already mentally not in a good place, to then feel that actually they're not being supported. That makes it far, far worse.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And something I care about is how often we re-traumatize the victim by getting them to tell the story again.
Yeah,
you know, that's another facet in here, because that's another reason why people drop off.
Okay, thanks for that. Thank you for that steer as well on your vision in this area, David. Really useful. Thank you, David Taylor. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to go through the panel list now. David, we touched on you. Sherry, got any points you'd like to raise?
Yes, just very briefly, not a question, just Can I ask Dave and Simon to assure us that the objectives in the former plan that are currently showing red don't get lost as we move forward into your new plan and your new KPIs. So we need to keep visibility of those things that were currently showing red. Thank you.
I'm pretty certain we won't, because one of them I've already started causing havoc with, so that's fine.
I'm sure that's true. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it does link into how the previous plan dovetails into the new plan, which
exactly so. Yes, we just don't want to lose anything in between time.
Yeah, use your expression, Dave. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So
correct.
That's true. Tony, sorry, Mark Howell.
No, thanks.
No, thanks, Mark. Tony?
Yeah, one of the indicators, the antisocial behaviour indicator, is amber, but it shows quite a huge increase. But I was rather surprised that non-COVID related antisocial behaviour only accounted for 7 of the 37.4%, if I understood the way it's set out properly, because I'm aware that there have been lots of people out on the streets that are under-occupied, that, you know, that the devil makes work for idle hands. And I know that our youth outreach workers, for example, have been working very hard to engage people in, you know, with their limited ability. But the one thing that this leads to is that regarding the 30+% that has been COVID related, I'm wondering whether we are prepared for a possible rise in the rather misnamed Freedom Day, with conflicts between people who will want to take precautions and reasonable precautions to be taken on public transport, in shops or whatever, and whether there will be conflicts between the need to be careful and the sensitivity of some people who will regard things as not totally encouraging, and you know, other people that will say, oh, you know, I'm free to do what I like, it doesn't matter anymore. I wonder whether we're prepared for an increase in antisocial behaviour resulting from conflicts of those nature.
Thank you, Tony. I mean, that's a very good question. I've had a number of conversations with the force around, for want of a better word, Freedom Day, the releasing of constraints on people. We've had it in the context of an increase in antisocial behaviour. So whilst it didn't specifically talk about those two groups, which I must admit I'm now cited on because it seems to be the press is determined to categorise us into those two groups. I'll make certain that is in our next conversation about that particular point. The general concept, though, of antisocial behaviour increasing is something that we've talked about, and the force is ready for that.
Yeah, thank you. As I say, I am concerned that there will be those who go out to the shops that feel that they should be wearing a mask, people working in shops, for example, and I'm just using shops as an example, who will still feel vulnerable, especially with a world-beating infection rate at the moment, and which is likely to be even more so at the time. And I do believe that there will be conflicts between those who will just say, you know, I can do what I like, and there are others that will be very cautious and sensitive on these issues. So, you know, I do look forward to some proactive measures taken to avoid conflict where it occurs. I am rather hoping that there is perhaps a little bit more guidelines to follow on that, because I I think, it's a bit like, I'm on a steep hill, a twisty turny road. I don't think letting the brakes off entirely is a good idea. You might perhaps, think, oh, I can go a little bit faster, but
I think you've made a good point there, Tony, and that the point you're highlighting there is a national point, but the actual conflict between those who do and don't is based on the relaxation of the rules is a very valid point. I'm going to move on to Barry.
Yeah, nothing. Thank you, Chairman.
George.
Yes, if I may, Chair. Commissioner, one of the things which is starting to come up, and it's obviously COVID and the lockdown has affected lots of people very adversely. But one of the things which is coming up is discrimination and it'd be fair to say almost hate crime towards disability and carers. They've felt it particularly hard over this lockdown. I wondered if in your own plan for the future you would undertake to give some consideration for people with disabilities, which I think makes up about 20%, and ensuring that their safety is taken into consideration within perhaps the vulnerability section of your forward police and crime plan.
George, it's almost like you are telepathic or looking over my shoulder. The one area that I said I very clearly wanted to do some working was disability discrimination. My background is one of medical education. That was my company, and we actually ran 80 educational masterclasses for secondary care consultants working in learning disability. So I have an understanding of that area, and also from the same background, funny enough, around pediatric issues and the neurodiversity issues which can come up. So yes, that is an area which I think we could do more in, and it's an area which I said I wanted to draw out in the plan.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, George. Bobby, finally.
Yes, it actually leads on really nicely from what George just asked. I was going to say that these plans and the ability to make real changes for the citizens of Dorset and residents of Dorset is really only as good as the data that we receive and the data that goes into these plans so that we can regulate it effectively. So therefore, I just wondered what it is that you will be doing and seeking to undertake so that we can increase faith and confidence of our residents, and particularly where we have high incidences of underreporting.
Simon, are you going to answer that, or shall I take that?
Don't mind either way. Should I talk about the work that's been underway for a while, and then potentially
do that
at the end? Yep, happy to do that. So there's a number of areas, Councillor Dove, as I think you're already well aware. So apologies, you'll hear me talking about things that you've already heard me talking about. But this continues to be both the national and local priority. There's a recognition, I think, that every time we talk about these things, that improves victim confidence, and that's important. So that's why we will be absolutely unashamed in continuing to talk about these issues, about vulnerability, about hate crime, about underreported incidents around rape and sexual offences and the like, and we'll continue to do that. There are some bits and pieces that we can do, and you will know, for example, about particularly over the course of the last year or so, the work that the OPCC funded around the provision of support for domestic abuse campaigns, the pharmacy bags, direct messaging, things like that. So trying to reach members of the public where they happen to be, because the services that they are usually able to access, they may not have had the ability to leave the house to go to. We're starting to see really good increases in reporting of historic offences. That's a positive, a huge positive. And I think actually victim confidence in that area is really starting to improve. I think also as well, it's reflective more broadly about some of those conversations that are happening nationally and across society in general. There will always be issues and concerns about victims coming forward to discuss difficult issues that have happened to them, whether it be recently or whether it be in the past. I think also as well, there is an expectation sometimes that it will be a difficult process for victims. And so whatever we can do to actually give members of the public the assurance that actually it's not, you will be listened to, you will be supported, you will be believed. And that really is hugely important. And so we will continue to do all of those things. Ultimately, it is part of a national agenda as well, particularly in regards to RASO, to rape and serious sexual offences. That remains probably one of the highest priorities nationally. So I think that you will start to see, hopefully, some national campaigning around this as well. That won't necessarily be led by this office, that we'll certainly be undertaking very strongly within Dorset.
Okay, thank you. Mike, may I just ask a very, very quickie as well, please?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. At the Prejudice Free Dorset meeting last month, they had asked that if I could raise the area of misogyny with the PCC, and also whether you would give it some thought in terms of recording in the future. I'll leave that one with you, if I may. It's a low baller. It's something I've thrown at you right now, so I don't expect a response right now.
Okay.
Okay.
I think it's probably worthwhile saying that I'm certainly not speaking for the Commissioner, but whilst police and crime commissioners and chief constables for that matter, and chairs of local authority are able to lobby, ultimately it's a government decision about what is constituted as a protected characteristic, and the National Crime Recording Standards are set by the Home Office. So Dorset Police will continue to abide by the National Crime Recording Standards. If those National Crime Recording Standards change, then Dorset Police will change in relation to those. There is some work that potentially can be done to improve recording, and there is a whole raft of work underway around something called CDI, crime data integrity. But I think the area that you're seeking to have a response on, Bobby, is probably one for government, I think.
Okay, that's fine. I think my challenge back to you would be, just for consideration, is the fact that we can adopt locally recognised characteristics. And I know that BCP Council have done that in terms of veterans, carers, etc., whilst not recognised as protected characteristics. And in light of Sarah Everard and Reclaim the Streets, one of the things that people talked about was harassment as they walked down the street. If there was a way, it may not be hate crime, but it to be recognised and recorded locally, we then get an image as to what's happening on our streets, and then that may feed into nationally how we respond to it. But thank you. And it might be a response that perhaps, like Chair, if it's okay, perhaps though PCC write to both us and to Prejudice Free Dorset. I think Gavin Dudfield is the chair. Perhaps to say that we've had this conversation and any work that may or may not come out of it, if that's okay.
I thought you were going to say something else, actually, but no, on the same theme. And Simon, you mentioned about lobbying. Any lobbying that you do, obviously, especially on this issue, this panel will more than support you in writing to government. So enough said on that, quite honestly. I'm just going to move swiftly on, unless anybody's got any burning issues they want to talk about, because I know Jim's got to cut away in a couple of minutes. Julie, could you just talk us through the finance package, please?
Certainly, Chair. Thank you. The last financial year has been a year like no other, not just for Dorset Police, but all public sector, private sector individuals. And the panel will recall earlier in the year we were forecasting significant overspends on the revenue budget. As a result of the action that the force have taken, I'm really pleased to be here today reporting that we had a small underspend at year end of £115,000, and we were therefore able to support a number of carry forward requests that were put forward, although only up to the value of that underspend, and that's why the report before you shows a break-even position for the year, because those carry forward requests have been actioned. The main changes to the budget in this quarter relate to PFI transactions between ourselves and Fire, and that is between the income budget and the overhead budget. There was additional income that we received late on during the quarter. Some of it actually we've only just been notified about, haven't actually received yet, but we're required to reflect that in the previous financial year. Those grants have been taken forward to the budget management reserve. So whilst the income shows favourable, there's a corresponding adverse variance within the transfer reserves. Savings within the overheads area were achieved as a result of we had a lot less travelling, lower estate repair costs, reduced fuel costs following the BP free fuel offer, but also when we were paying for fuel, it was at lower prices than we had budgeted for, and the resulting revenue impact of IT projects being delayed as a result of the pandemic. One of the actions that we did take during the year to try and offset some of our major operations costs was to use £250,000 from the major operations reserve. That was taken into account, particularly in relation to summer policing last year, and that pressure does continue, in particularly as we're coming out of lockdown, all of those additional pressures of opening up the nighttime economy, etc. So the COVID grant that we received at the end of the year, which has been put into the budget management reserve, will be used to fund the summer policing operation this year, but also the force are looking to build that into the budget as we work towards next year's budget. Contributions from the revenue budget to the capital programme are also higher than we originally budgeted. That's predominantly from using some of the revenue uplift grant that we received to pay for things like vehicles and equipment that were purchased out of the capital programme, but also some regional contributions we received to do with some forensics buildings works that were undertaken. So that was received through the revenue budget and contributed across to the capital programme. In terms of the capital programme, that was £3.2 million underspent during the year, although most of that is relating to slippage, so where programmes were delayed, etc., and will fall into the current financial year. Overall, that means that borrowing has been less than we originally planned, so delays some of those costs, but will be picked up in future years. So overall, I would say that this has been a positive year from a financial perspective, but I'm happy to answer any questions, etc.
I have one question, if that's okay. You mentioned about the budget management fund reserve. That's now 1.2 million. That has to be spent in year based on your own policies. Do you have any, or does the PCC have any plans for that money at all at the moment?
Yep. So as I said, 400, just over 400,000 is being earmarked to support summer policing.
Yep.
And 300,000 of that is relating to the innovation fund. So where that hasn't been spent but has been committed, that will be rolled forward. So that's a big chunk. There's also 220,000 was relating to emergency services network costs. It was a grant that we received for costs in last year, but also future years. So obviously there'll be costs that come up this year that related to. And the other grant was to do with the local tax guarantee grant that we actually budgeted for in the current financial year, but the accounting rules meant we had to take it back into last year. So it doesn't make particular sense, but we had to follow those rules. So that will be used in the current year. And then obviously there's the remaining balances, the 115,000 of carry forwards, which have all got specific projects that are being undertaken in the current year. So that will be used.
So what you're saying is that 1.2 million has already been utilised.
Yeah, it's been carried forward for specific things.
Okay, fine. Thanks very much for that. We were going to have a short break. I think we can push on if that's okay with everyone. Item 7, annual report. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. As before,
sorry, Chairman, before you carry on, it's Jonathan Mayer, the monitoring officer. Understanding orders, if a meeting is going to continue beyond the 3-hour mark, then the committee must either resolve to continue or you must adjourn to another date. So I think you need to get a view from the committee chairman about whether you continue now and expressly agree to do that, or you must adjourn.
Yeah, well, we're not going to adjourn, we're going to crack on.
So, Chairman, I think you need a view from the panel that they are happy to do that.
Right, can I have a first or
Chair,
second?
I'll propose that we continue and resolve the business of today.
Thank you very much. Bobby?
And our second.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jonathan. Very
Thank
kind.
you very much.
Thank you. So, annual report, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. So we have kept the 2020-2021 annual report fairly light touch for obvious reasons, but members will recognise the various schemes, initiatives and projects that OPCC has supported over the past year. Chair, you helpfully reminded me that I should refer back to the precept increase that was asked for to support this activity. So I'll quickly do that. So just to remind members, you were kind enough to support the PCC's request to raise precept by the nationally suggested figure of £10 back in February 2020. The proposal put before you at the time by the previous commissioner was for a balanced budget, which included the support of the recruitment of those 50 officers, but with, and I quote, no bells and whistles this year, just a prudent budget that delivers 50 extra officers and a manageable reserve. So to confirm, Chair, that was delivered. So those 50 officers are in place for the first year, and they are progressing through their training well and taking their first steps towards becoming fully fledged officers. The thing that we didn't know, of course, back in February last year was that, you know, what a thoroughly awful year 2020 was going to shape out to be. And so members will know that the entire public sector joined together with the single purpose of protecting the public from this terrible virus. And with that in mind, there was a whole raft of activity that was undertaken in the last year or so that was unexpected. And just wanted to take the opportunity to thank the incredible efforts of our charities, our community groups and our service providers for their huge efforts in keeping the wheels spinning, many of whom did so without the benefit or the additionality of further funding. Chair, I'm very happy to take any questions, but I imagine that you'll be seeking members' views on the draft report as you normally do. So if I can, would I be able to ask you to pull together some a response to OPCC by Friday the 23rd?
Yes, please, we will obviously do that. So therefore, if I could ask panel members to respond to the annual report that's in the pack that you've got in front of you by the 16th of July to Mark. Mark and I will smash all your comments into one single document, and I will write to the OPCC with the panel's view on the annual report, obviously copying panel members into that response. Does anybody have any issues with what I just outlined there from a panel perspective? I can't see anybody jumping up and down at the moment, which is good news. Right, so in that case then, I'm going to move on to item 8. Unfortunately, Ian's not with us today. So Mark, could I ask you to lead us through the complaints verbal update, please?
Thanks, Chair. No problem at all. Very quick one, to be fair this time. There have been no new complaints submitted since the last panel meeting, and there are currently no complaints open.
Thank you very much for that. So moving on to item 9, Mark, again, forward work plan.
Yeah, again, I'll keep this one fairly brief. So the forward plan is set out at item number 9. There have been a number of additions that have been recommended during this meeting. What I'll do is I'll review the plan with the Chair and the Vice Chair over the next few months, because I think it is an area that's moved on a little bit, we need to revise.
Yeah, and obviously, Dave, we will work with your office on the forward work plan to make sure we're all in agreement with what is on it. It's pointless putting on stuff on there that is nugatory as far as your office is concerned. Perfectly honest.
No, makes sense.
Chair, if I may, September is looking quite busy. And I appreciate, exactly as Mark said, there's a number of things that have been asked to come forward, and so it would be really helpful to have a conversation about prioritising those,
Yeah.
and perhaps something to discuss at the wash up.
Yes, thank you very much. Good point, Simon. We need to nail that. I was going to say within the next month, but actually that's nail it next week. Get it done out of the way. Yeah, thank you for that.
Sure.
Item 10, urgent items. Mark?
No, nothing, Chair.
And to the best of my business, we've got no exempt business. So I'm now going to go around the panel first. I'm not going to go through a matrix. I'm just going to see if anybody from the panel got any points they'd like to raise based on today's meeting. No, thank you very much. Simon, do you have any points?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mark?
Nothing from me, Chair.
No, thank you. Finally, Dave.
Only to say, you mentioned something earlier about lobbying, Chair.
Yep.
I am very aware that you, as a panel, have been very supportive of lobbying moves in the past. I look forward to that because there will be things that I want to lobby about going forward.
Good.
When I bring those forward, I'll bring them to you outside of panel business, unless the panel business coincides, because I won't want to wait a quarter to gain your agreement, if that's acceptable.
And that is very acceptable, and it's all part of our support and scrutiny role in supporting your team and you in your role as PCC.
And thank you for this first meeting. Thank you for the panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, on that high note, I can't see any hands. I can't see anybody whizzing around. Mark, can you hold on? Simon, could you hold on as well, please? And Bobby as well. And then in that case, then I'm now going to close this meeting. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time, PCC. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David.
Bye, David.
Bye-bye all.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheerio, bye.
Darren, can I just check it's the recording's finished? Fantastic, thank you.
You are 100% certain of that, are you, Darren? we